Vaughn Crandall walked along the river and kept his eyes straight ahead. He was doing his best, really trying this time. The last thing he wanted to do was show his frustration and anger in front of his in-laws, but Judy was over there with them, looking in the window of some antique shop, what felt like the 900th antique shop they had been in since this visit started. Vaughn cracked his neck and shifted from one foot to the other, clearing his throat. Whatever. He and Judy weren't fighting right now, which was the point. She was off with her parents, seemingly happy and distracted. Vaughn could walk around trying to find something he wanted to do with his time. Something to distract him from what was happening to him and Judy. Find anything to amuse him so he could pretend things were fine. There wasn't much here, though. A river bisected the tiny town. Up in the wooded hills on either side of the downtown area were likely homes nestled within subdivisions, but right here were restaurants and souvenir stores, not to mention the line of endless antique stores. How many times could you look at rusted signs from diners and stores, or the same old beat-up furniture? Apparently, you could do so for a long time, as evidenced by the amount of time they had spent inside those stores today. Vaughn paused to look into a window and found himself gazing into a very nice-looking bar with bottles of liquor along the wall. It wasn't quite 11 yet, so the place was closed. He wished it was open. Sitting at the bar with a drink and maybe a burger matched with a pile of French fries seemed like just the perfect thing to help him forget. The long drive to this town just yesterday had frayed his nerves enough. Today, sitting in the car with his in-laws to come to the town of antique stores had caused those nerves to snap off like dried twigs during a drought. He was in the dangerous territory where one word might set him off. Doing so would not improve things with Judy. The bar stools were still up on the bar. The tables shone from the light filtered through the thick windows. A large mirror dominated the back wall behind the bar, reflecting the backs of the liquor bottles. Vaughn studied it almost wistfully. He wasn't even much of a drinker, normally, but today seemed like the kind of day to imbibe. He wondered if these were dangerous thoughts, but decided he didn't really care. Unable to wet his whistle, Vaughn continued down the street. Off to his left and across the road was the restaurant where his wife wanted them all to have lunch. It looked pleasant enough, but the menu was nothing special. He had already studied it online via his phone an hour ago. Plus, the thought of making more small talk with these people gave him stomach cramps. Sighing, his hands in his pockets, Vaughn ambled down the street. The next building appeared to be a real estate office. The building he came to next, however, was at least mildly interesting. A library. Vaughn muttered to himself. It was an old-fashioned-looking library, too. Perhaps it had once been the town courthouse, converted to a new purpose. A long set of marble stairs led up to a brick building, with wide, white columns leading to a black wooden door. The door held windows through which he could see the stacks of books and the counter near the front, which was probably where the librarian checked the books in and out. A typical small-town library if there ever had been one, like something out of a painting of rural America from the 50s. If there was one thing Vaughn appreciated, it was books. He had fond memories of being a kid hiding out in the stacks at his local library. Hours spent reading while his mother went shopping, or his parents spent time doing other things when they didn't want him around. For the first time on the trip, Vaughn smiled. "I'm heading up here," he called out toward the general direction of his wife. She cast a quick glance in his direction and raised one hand. This was enough for Vaughn to determine he had permission to move forward. Vaughn climbed the stairs. No one else came up with him, and no one emerged from the library either. All was very quiet around here at the moment. Perhaps not too much going on in the library today. It didn't matter much to him. He pushed the heavy wooden door in, and it creaked in protest as he did. As soon as he was inside, the old, musty smell of books hit his nostrils. It surprised him to see he was actually in a small foyer. It hadn't looked as if there was a second set of doors from the bottom of the stairs. To his left was a brown door and a men's room. To his right appeared to be a community bulletin board and the women's room. He paused to study the postings on the board. Babysitting, lawn mowing, dog walking. All services provided by people from the area. A bulletin about a local church spaghetti dinner, typical of nearly every library in every town. Vaughn smiled again. The inside called to him, so he swung open the interior doors. The full smell of books hit him hard. An old, chipped wooden librarian's counter stood just to the right. There was an ancient, bulky computer monitor filling one end of the desk, its plastic surface covered in various colored Post-it notes. There were stacks of books and more stacks of magazines, probably being checked back in. "Hello there." It was the voice of a woman, pleasant but older. Vaughn turned to see a hunched woman shuffling across the warped hardwood floors. She had a mop of curly red hair on top of her head and walked with a black cane. Next to her was a black Labrador with gray around its muzzle, but a vigorously wagging tail. "Hello there," Vaughn said, slouching out of her way as she strode her way behind the desk and, with great effort, found her way onto a stool behind it. "I'm just visiting here with my wife and in-laws. I saw the library and had to come in. My name's Vaughn, by the way." "Well, welcome. We enjoy having visitors. My name is Dolores, and my four-legged companion is T.S. T.S. cast a glance toward him, sniffed the air before turning around 3 times and laying down on a large dog bed covered in black fur. The dog heaved a mighty sigh as it lay its head down between its paws and promptly appeared to go to sleep. "Do you get many visitors here?" Vaughn asked. "Oh, some days are busier than others," Dolores replied. "Feel free to look around. There's a room near the back with a bunch of historical stuff about this little town, photos and whatnot. I'm sorry you can't really check anything out, especially if you're heading back to wherever you're from, but if you're staying in town, we can probably arrange something. I just have to take good care of this collection." "Not a problem," Vaughn replied. "Thanks, I'll just look around." Dolores set about typing on her ancient computer, slowly, one key at a time. It must take 45 minutes to check out a book in this place. It was sort of endearing. Vaughn was soon lost among the stacks of books, heading toward the back wall. Vaughn had no idea how long he was lost reviewing old books, cracking open their plastic-covered spines and rooting through yellowed paper, but eventually Judy showed up, scaring him when she put her hand on his shoulder. He whirled around to look at her, dropping the book he was holding, and clutched his heart. "Ugh, you scared the shit out of me," he said, bending over to pick up the book and place it back on the shelf. "Are you staying in here the rest of the afternoon?" she asked. "Are we going for lunch yet?" He returned with another question. "What time is it?" Not quite time for lunch yet, just after 10. Judy said while shaking her head. "Typical. You don't pay attention at the time. You can't check anything out. Why are you even in here?" Vaughn smiled. The tension from last night had evaporated for him. Their arguments during the long drive had receded from his mind as he walked around the library. "Look at this place. It's fantastic," he said. Judy looked around for a moment, then shrugged. "It's a library," she said. "Fine, just stay in here. Can you try to keep track of the time? Meet us over at the restaurant at 11:30. He nodded. "Yes, fine. How are they doing? You guys having fun?" "Yes," Judy replied. "We're having a great time. Mom wants to look at a couple more shops. We need to find something to put in the one corner of the kitchen, the one by the window." Vaughn had no clue what she meant. All the corners were the same as far as he could recall, but he didn't want to start another fight. He nodded instead. "Okay, watch the time." She did not lean in for a kiss. Instead, she turned and walked off. Vaughn watched her go, even smiled as she scratched the dog behind the ears. He felt love in his heart for her, but also this sadness. So much sadness between them lately, and it was so hard to put a finger on why. Those were the moments when Vaughn could pretend all was right with his marriage. It was tempting to blame it all on Judy, but it was just as much his fault. They had started out fighting about everything, then slowly drifted apart. Yesterday's adventure in the car had started out positive, but as the miles went on and they got bored, the nerves had frayed to the breaking point. When Vaughn had insisted they needed to stop at a rest stop to wait out a thunderstorm and Judy had argued against it, things escalated quickly. By the end, they were standing in the parking lot of the rest stop screaming at each other, neither making any points worth noting, while lightning flashed around them and thunder rolled in the distance. The smell of rain filled the air. The rest of the drive, an additional 2 grueling hours, they sat mostly in silence. Vaughn drove as the rain pelted them, almost wishing he'd skid off the road just to prove a point. Vaughn looked down at his feet and sighed again. They had been so in love at one point and still had moments. When had things changed? Probably when they both had troubles at work, which they soon brought home. They tried to pull out of the nosedive repeatedly. Vaughn still held out hope they could save the craft and the passengers. Now was not the time to think about it, though. There was no way he could come up with a solution to save his marriage right here in the library. Instead, he looked at the shelves, continued his walk, got lost in the library. He eventually got to the Historic Center. It wasn't much bigger than a closet, but the historic photos on the walls were fascinating. There were books under glass with signatures in them which must have meant something to the town or area, but Vaughn recognized nothing. He meandered around for a while longer yet. When he looked at his watch, it was nearing 11, and he figured he should make his way back up to the front. Vaughn paused to check a few more books, but eventually he found himself at the front again. Dolores still sat at her computer, with T.S. still sound asleep with his nose between his paws. "Thanks for letting me browse," he said. "Gotta meet the rest of the family for lunch." Dolores looked up and smiled.
"Thanks for stopping by. Things get slow here during the summer. Kids come use this place to write their papers and stuff during the school year, plus people head out of town. It's nice to have some company."
"Glad to oblige," Vaughn said, and he raised his hand in a friendly gesture. Dolores returned to her computer, and Vaughn headed for the door. He knew it would be hot outside by now and was bracing himself for the blast of heat as he pushed his way through the inner doors. Already, the foyer area felt warm. His intent was to just walk past the restrooms and the bulletin board to head across the street. Something stopped him. The door set into the wall, closed when he first came in, now stood wide open. For an instant, Vaughn was sure he saw movement within the shadows beyond the door, just a quick dash of something roughly the height of a human, but little more than a shadow. Vaughn was sure this was nothing. At least, this is what his brain told him. There was nothing here, nothing to see. Just go, just run across the street, go have lunch. But something else inside his head told him he needed to at least peek into the open door and see what was there.
"You like books?"
Vaughn nearly jumped out of his shoes. The voice came from the darkness. He couldn't see who was there, of course, nor make out if the voice was male or female. It broke and cracked as it spoke, sounding ancient. For some reason, Vaughn thought of an anthropomorphic turtle with glasses perched on the end of its nose. "Yes," Vaughn replied.
"Well, you should come up here,"
the voice said. It was filled with good humor, or so Vaughn thought, but still, no one came into view.
"There are books up here you will see nowhere else."
"Who are you?"
"Well, I'm a librarian. Now, come upstairs and stop asking dumb questions."
There was the sound of shuffling feet heading up a flight of stairs. Slowly but steadily. Vaughn laughed, looked around. This was a joke, right? This was something the townspeople played on the new folks in town, right? He looked back through the inner door and saw Dolores still sitting behind the desk.
"Are you coming?"
The voice was higher up, further away. Old, but spry, it seemed. Vaughn cast one more glance out the front window, saw his wife and in-laws heading toward the restaurant. He wouldn't have much time. He had always been the curious type. Sometimes he had wished he could solve a mystery or become a detective. He also devoured true crime podcasts and books. Now, here was a real mystery in front of him. Laughing to himself, and sure this was all going to be a huge prank, Vaughn stepped through the door into the shadows. Almost immediately, the darkness overtook him, and he felt an odd buzzing sensation in the back of his head. For a fraction of an instant, It was as if the entire planet tipped on its axis. Vaughn shook his head to clear it, and the sensation passed. In front of him was a set of stairs. They led up to a landing, and a doorway stood off to the right at the top. He couldn't see what was going on within the room. The air was musty. Near the top of the stairs, set high in the wall, were windows, which cast an eerie yellowish glow. Vaughn headed up the stairs. The atmosphere was thick, like trying to breathe on a very hot and humid day. He got to the top of the stairs and turned right. Through the doorway was a small room with what appeared to be a marble floor. At the far end of the room was a long counter, much like the one downstairs, but longer. Behind this was a man with red hair, again, like downstairs, but hunched over as if carrying a heavy weight on his shoulders. He had small, round glasses perched on the end of his long nose.
Well, hello. There you are.
Vaughn stared at the man, and something happened. For a moment, the area behind the man swirled and shimmered as if it were a hologram. There was a large empty space behind the man, dark, but with what looked like the edges of bookshelves just barely peeking out into the light. For an instant, the image flickered, and Vaughn had the image of a vast, infinite space. Shelves upon shelves upon shelves crammed with books. Then the image was gone, and it was just a space hidden in shadows. "What is this place?" he asked.
Well, that's a hard question to answer,
The old man said.
My name is Abe. I've been here for a long time now. I monitor Dolores below there. Well, it's Dolores down there now, but there have been others. I keep an eye on those who come in and out and who walk past the place. Sometimes there are people who grab my attention. I invite them into this hidden library.
Vaughn stepped into the outer room. He looked around. There were strange murals on the walls and ceiling, scenes from both human history and legend. Demons dancing with angels and men fighting with men. A large depiction of Cain and Abel dominated the ceiling. There were no bookshelves in here, no bulletin boards, nothing you might find in a standard library lobby. This doesn't look like any library I've ever seen, Vaughn said. And why would there be a hidden library in a place like this little town?
Why not a place like this?
Abe replied. I don't understand any of this. Abe shook his head and smiled. Once again, the image flickered, and Vaughn saw something else sitting behind the counter besides an old man. Something huge with claws and a bent back, a kind of creature with large teeth and slit eyes like a cat. Then it was gone, and there was just Abe, hunched as ever. The old man adjusted the glasses on the end of his nose.
Why not here? In a little place like this, you can select those you invite into the secret, of course. A selective clientele. You set up a place like this in New York and you get overwhelmed by 1,000 people, 1,000,000. It's impossible to find just the right person amongst all the static and noise.
What's the right person?
You are, of course.
Vaughn stepped further into the room. The buzzing entered his head again, and once again the air felt thick. Despite the odd drunken feeling, he felt compelled to walk further into the room. He had to approach Abe. For the moment, Judy and the in-laws were far from his mind. Why am I the person you want? Abe smiled. The edges of his mouth caused his entire face to turn into a mass of wrinkles.
You need knowledge. You seek knowledge. Plus, there are things you think you know which you do not, or things you should know which you do not. There are many reasons, dozens of them, and we can eventually discuss them all. But let's start with those.
I don't understand.
No, you don't. But you will.
Abe stood up taller for a moment and extended his arms. Behind him, a light flickered on, and now the room behind him came into full view. Gray walls and ceiling, but the walls extended further and further into the background and then out of view. Metal bookshelves stood at attention, extending just as far into eternity as the walls and ceiling. Each shelf was lined with books without titles, of varying sizes, layer upon layer of shelving going on and on forever. "What?" Vaughn gasped. His mouth hung open.
"This is the library, Vaughn,"
Abe said, turning around to admire his handiwork.
"The ultimate library. The library which has all the knowledge there ever was and ever could be."
"What are all of those books?" Vaughn whispered. "What are they?"
"I could tell you, but it would be easier to show you,"
Abe said, shuffling further down the counter. He stared at the bookshelves behind him.
"Think of a person."
"What?"
"Think of a person,"
Abe repeated slowly.
"Anyone but yourself. Think of any person alive or dead."
Without meaning to, Vaughn thought of his mother. He could, for an instant, see her clearly in his mind, sitting in her chair back in her one-bedroom apartment, the place she sat since his father died. He could see her holding the remote in her hand, watching game shows on TV.
"A fine choice,"
Abe said, and then he clapped his hands. To Vaughn's amazement, the shelves behind him began to move. The spines of the books began to swirl and spin around their shelves. It reminded Vaughn of seeing all of the clothes wrapped in plastic, hanging from hooks, spinning around in a dry cleaner's. It was the only comparison he could come up with. A moment later, a single book suddenly spat itself from the top shelf. Abe extended both hands, and the book slowly tumbled from the shelf to rest in his palms. He turned a moment later, the smile back on his face, and the glasses shining at the end of his nose with an internal fire. For a moment, Vaughn saw flames reflected in his lenses.
"Come over here,"
he said, setting the book down on the counter.
"Come look at this."
Vaughn walked slowly across the floor, his feet echoing against the walls. The wood cracked beneath his shoes. He approached the book, which seemed to breathe as he got closer, bigger and then thinner. Vaughn gasped again as he got close to the counter and saw what was embossed across the front of the book. "That's my mother's name," he said quietly.
"Yes, this is her book."
"I don't—"
"Open it."
Vaughn reached for the book with shaking hands. His fingers brushed against the book and felt the bumps and ridges from the material. There was a soft feeling of electricity there, too, a tingling through the pads of his fingertips. He gripped the edge of the cover and slowly pulled it back. Words. Thousands upon thousands of words across the pages. It took Vaughn a moment to actually digest what he was looking at. The words seemed like a jumble at first. Then they began to coalesce into sentences. However, they still didn't make much sense. It seemed like a book filled with random sentences without any coherent story. "I don't understand this," Vaughn said. "None of this makes any sense. Why do you have a nonsense book about my mother?" Abe leaned forward, pointed one twisted finger at the words.
"You're trying too hard. You have to relax and let your brain decipher what's there. Have you ever heard of the writing stream of consciousness? This is the ultimate version of that. But if you relax and stop trying so hard, your brain will sort it out and it will start making sense."
Abe reached his finger up and touched Vaughn's forehead. There was a bright flash behind Vaughn's eyes and he blinked. It was like a firecracker went off in his brain for an instant, and then he looked down at the book. Slowly, the words started to make more sense. Yes, they were starting to make sense. This was a page from when his mother was a teenager. She was in her bedroom, pining away for some boy named Hank in her class. He was so handsome, and she wondered what it would be like to kiss him. Vaughn turned a page. Now Mom was on a road trip with the rest of her family. She was bored, staring out the window, wishing she was back home. If she were home, she'd have had the house to herself, and maybe she could invite Hank over. Maybe he would come, but he might not. They had been talking the last few days. He flipped more pages. Mom was in her 20s now. She was in college and hanging with her friends. They were planning to go to a party. She was wondering what she would wear. He flipped again. Now she was on a date with his father, Chris. He was so handsome and so smart. She loved him completely, and she hoped he might ask her to marry him. She would say yes without hesitation. She knew this was the man she wanted to be with for the rest of her life. She wondered what it would be like to crawl into bed with him and what he... Vaughn quickly flipped the page. He didn't need to see more of that. "Is this a diary?" Vaughn asked, his concern rising. "What did you do? Did you steal my mom's diary?" Abe laughed. It was a weird, twisted laugh, which started out sounding like an old man in a small town, then got deeper and more guttural, before turning back into an old man laugh. Vaughn tore his eyes away from the book, had the moment where reality seemed to flicker and the room around him changed, but it was so quick he couldn't make out details. Abe's face was red from laughing, his cheeks like red apples on either side of his long nose. Had his nose gotten longer?
No, you still don't get it, do you? No one ever does when they first come in here, though, so don't feel too bad. These aren't diaries, per se. They're thoughts. Books filled with thoughts. Look, turn to the last pages there.
Vaughn's head felt fuzzy again. Was the air thicker in here? Was there a strange burning smell, too? He flipped the book to the last pages. At first, there was just a blank page. Then, as if an invisible pen in an invisible hand were writing, words began to appear. Like before, first it was just a jumble of words, but then it began to cohere into sentences. "I wonder what Vaughn is doing. He hasn't called me in a while. Oh well, I hope he and Judy can stop by soon. What should I have for dinner tonight? I think I need to head to the store. Is my TV show on tonight or is it tomorrow? Oh, I can't keep anything straight anymore. I worry about being in this apartment by myself these days. I hate having to be here, and that he died. Why did he have to do that to himself? Now I'm here and no one I know is around. Oh, I hate him. No, I love him. I always will. Now, what about dinner?" It continued on like this, an endless stream of thoughts appearing slowly, a letter, then a word at a time. Soon it filled the page. There was an odd sensation in Vaughn's fingers, and to his surprise, now there was a new page. He flipped to it, and the words began to appear there too, just on and on. "Is this my mom's thoughts?" Vaughn whispered, in a weird mix of awe and pure terror. He looked up at Abe and expected the man to appear like some demon, but he was just an old man, smiling. "Is that what this is?"
It takes you a while, but you do eventually catch on, don't you?
Abe laughed and clapped his hands.
Yes, this is a very special library, filled with very special books.
"How is this possible?" Vaughn asked. "Is there a book for me?"
Of course there is,
Abe replied.
Everyone who is and ever was. Remember all of those times teachers in your religious schools told you even your thoughts were known? Well, here it is. All of human thought recorded in these books. Every dirty secret, every invention, every sexual thought or thought of murder. Everything right here. Want to see another one?
Vaughn felt sick to his stomach. The world felt as if it were tipping crazily on its axis again. He staggered to the right just a bit. I don't think this is real," he said.
Oh, it's real,
Abe replied.
You just don't want to accept it. Right now, your book is filling with thoughts about how you've gone crazy or I'm crazy. Some part of you wants to believe this is all a hallucination, perhaps a dream. Oh, by the way, we record those too. So many dreams. All of the ones you ever forgot, recorded here in these books. Want to see what the president is thinking? How about your favorite actor or actress? The girl you had such a crush on when you were 15, maybe? You can find out every place she's been, every man or woman she was with since then, and what she's doing right now.
"I need to go," Vaughn said, his voice weak. "I need to leave. This is utterly insane. Why would you bring me into this nightmare?" Abe just smiled.
Oh, there are many reasons, but the fact is I'm searching just like you. Searching for someone to take over this job. I've been doing it for a very long time now.
"You're insane. This is all insane. I've lost my mind."
You wouldn't be the first to do so. It's part of the problem, you see. There's much more back here than your mom's sex life as a teenager. Darker things by far, and things which, well, let's just say most men cannot handle. It takes a very special mind, a special person.
Vaughn turned his head to make sure the door was still there. It was.
Yes, you can leave if you want, but keep this in mind. The hidden library isn't always there. It moves. I move. Even I can't control it, but I know I'll be here for a little while longer.
Abe leaned in closer, then reached out and touched Vaughn's hand.
Take a look at a few more,
Abe said with a glint in his eye.
Maybe someone not so close to you. Think again. Relax. Think again.
In an instant, Vaughn thought of the Oval Office. He could picture it in his mind, having seen it in movies and on television so many times. He could even picture the president sitting behind the desk.
Another good choice,
Abe said approvingly.
Maybe a bit predictable, but nice.
Abe extended a hand, and the book spun around and around again. Then, near the top shelf, one book twisted off and into the air. Slowly, like a leaf on the breeze, it came to rest in front of Abe.
There you go,
he said. Vaughn opened the book. There was the swirl of words which slowly grew into focus. The earliest thoughts of the man who ran the free world. Thoughts of him as a child, wanting to be a fireman. Then thoughts of him in school, frustrated over a math quiz. Then he was in high school, running for class president and doing well in debate. Then running for a local office, working his way up. He turned the pages slowly, then gripped the book, flipping toward the end. Now he saw the thoughts of the man during the election process. A man so changed it was hard to read. Vicious, willing to find the dirtiest hidden secret of his opponent and putting it out there. Then there were thoughts about using campaign funds for personal things, crossing the lines and accepting donations from people he should not, accepting information about opponents from foreign entities. Finally, there was election night. The celebrations, the victory of inauguration, then settling down into the role, the mundane things of endless meetings and phone calls. But hidden near the end, thoughts of assassinating other world leaders, using drones to kill off opponents in other countries and wondering if he could use them on opponents in this country. Violent thoughts against the media, the opposing party, senators, and representatives. Jesus, Vaughn said.
It happens nearly every time,
Abe said, shaking his head.
The power gets to them. It's a drug, you see. Getting power makes you want more power. Then you want to keep power. They all start out with good intentions, even noble intentions, but they all turn out to be schemers and potential killers. In fact, you want to see real corruption? Look at this one.
The book spun again, and another book floated down. When Vaughn stared at the cover, he gasped. "The Pope?" he said. "Really?" The pages opened and flew past on their own. Vaughn saw the thoughts of a young man with a deep devotion to God, the decision to go into the priesthood, the years spent running one congregation after another, the temptations, the resistance, then the growth of power rising among the ranks, the corruption which came with it, moving priests around when the scandals erupted. Near the back, the election from the cardinals elevating him to pope. Then the realization how many looked to him as a leader. The doubts, the realization maybe God wasn't up there and this was all just him and his decisions. The endless tediousness of the job, running the tiny country of the Vatican, but trying to hold on to the idea he was the spiritual leader for millions. Thoughts of suicide, worry about those who might want to kill him.
So much doubt, Abe said. So much worry about what he is doing and whether or not any of it matters. Of course, none of it does. But it's the religious who wonder if these books exist. They think God or Jesus sits here and watches the words as they come, but no. Just me. Just whomever runs the hidden library. All here. Recorded.
But for whom? Vaughn asked.
You think I know?
Abe said.
You think I have knowledge when I do not. Yes, I can read the thoughts of anyone who has ever lived or is living, but I don't know what the use of this library is. I just exist here. There are others and other branches also existing. What purpose this serves, I do not know. Like a mouse living in a car factory. It knows something is happening and it can see things going on, but the purpose of all the activity is elusive. The religious believe there will eventually be an accounting. Perhaps one day, someone will come to read all of this and make a judgment.
Abe shrugged. I still don't understand why I'm here, Vaughn said. I still don't think this is real.
It's always the same,
Abe sighed.
I thought the same thing. None of this is real. Imagine me standing where you are centuries ago. Let's put these away.
Abe waved his hand, and the 2 books on the counter flew away and back into the shuffling madness of those books spinning around on the shelves behind him. Vaughn watched the millions, billions of books spinning around and around. Gray-colored books with nothing written on the spines or indicative of what they were. Vaughn wondered what his book looked like.
Sometimes you just get a feeling about a person,
Abe said.
I saw you interact with Dolores. I saw you browsing those books and you talking to your wife. I got a feeling you were meant for something else, Vaughn. We're looking to expand. Perhaps you could be a librarian.
Vaughn shook his head. I can't. No way. Abe nodded.
Well, you've looked at your mother and perhaps 2 of the most powerful people in the world. But there may be things closer to home you want to know. You should see the full power of the library before you decide.
Abe stood up and stared at the books on the shelves behind him. He seemed satisfied and then waved his hand. The room behind the counter went dark. When he turned around, his eyes flashed gold and then red.
There may be things you decide you want to know. Things about those close to you, or whom you think are close to you. But you can leave if you want to. I can sense your desire to run.
Abe leaned back, stared at Vaughn for a moment. Vaughn got the distinct feeling he was being scanned, his mind read.
Watch your wife, Vaughn,
the old man said.
Watch close.
There was a small irony in the fact Judy and Vaughn had met in a library at the very start of their relationship. They both attended the same college and were in their senior years when this woman with an armful of books staggered past the table where Vaughn was also buried in his studies. When she bumped into the table and a stack of books fell in his lap, Vaughn let out a yelp of surprise, but then stood up to help this beautiful blonde woman find a seat. The seat right across from Vaughn, of course. Vaughn had seen Judy in some of his classes. He had always thought she was gorgeous, with her striking blue eyes and long hair. She had the perfect face, in his opinion. Slightly round, with a hint of a chin, perfectly rounded nose. She had a habit of tilting her head down while gazing up at people with her eyes and a mischievous grin on her lips. He had studied those lips many times from across the classroom and wondered what they would be like to kiss. However, he was shy and certain she had a boyfriend. Here she was now, sitting across from him. She was studying to become an English major with a minor in journalism. He was finishing up his degree in business with an emphasis on marketing. During the course of their 4 years, he had taken many writing courses, and she had as well. Once they had even ended up in a fiction writing class where he watched her read the works of fiction she created. Once she was sitting across from him, it was Judy who started talking. It turned out she had noticed him too in the fiction writing class. Although he wrote dark, creepy stories, she was a fan and admired his ability to tell a tale. Before long, they were forgetting their studies and the papers they were trying to write, and whispering feverishly to each other. In fact, they got so lost in their conversation, the librarian finally asked them to leave due to noise complaints. Giggling and laughing, they gathered their books, checked out, and headed to the campus diner, where they continued talking long into the night. It turned out Judy had an apartment just off campus. Vaughn still resided in the dorms. As the night wore on, and even the diner was closing, they held hands across the table. She invited him back. He accepted. They held each other during the night, not having sex, but sleeping and talking. It was a magical night, and one of Vaughn's core memories of her. Seeing her in the morning light and brushing the long lock of hair from out of her face to see her eyes and the smile focused just on him. From that moment on, they were together a lot. When they graduated, Vaughn decided to stay in the city where the college was and where Judy had gotten her first job. He found work in other areas than his major until they decided to get married, and together they made the decision to move back to the big city up north. They had talked about having children, but were always lost in their careers. They both agreed during a long discussion one night they were not meant to be parents. Their own parents didn't understand, but they were certain. Now here they were, the walls between built up as mysteriously as a thief in the night. Vaughn picked at the salad in front of him. He'd kept his head down and moved the food around his plate for most of the interminable hour they had been sitting at the table. Judy and her parents chatted away and, from time to time, seemed to remember he was there in order to ask him a question. So far, he seemed to have answered them all correctly as they kept talking, but he had no clue what replies he gave. Not long after Abe gave his warning, he had run, pummeling his way down the stairs and out the door into the sunlight. To his surprise, his wife and in-laws were still just standing in front of the restaurant where he had seen them before entering the hidden library. In fact, for a moment, it was as if all the world were on pause. Birds appeared frozen in midair. The wind blew trees, which were bent in response, but no leaves rustled. It was a fraction of a second, but long enough for his brain to register the anomaly. Then the world snapped into play again, and his wife turned to see him bolt out of the library. "What's the rush?" she asked, giving him a mildly concerned, mostly irritated look. Vaughn stopped in front of them, his heart hammering, his head buzzing once more, trying his hardest to look like he knew what the holy fuck was going on. He hoped the sheer terror he was feeling was not clear on his face. He was very sure he was losing his mind. Did it show? "I thought I was late," he said, then tried on a smile which felt as fake as a mask. His in-laws smiled back, so it must have been a good charade. "Sorry, I looked at the time and thought I was late." Judy actually smiled, then put her arm in his. "No, right on time. Let's get lunch." They walked inside. The cold air in the restaurant was like a slap in the face or a bucket of cold water dumped on his head. Vaughn reached up and wiped his face, and his hand came away soaked with sweat. Was he having a heart attack? He cast a glance back over his shoulder at the library. It was just the library. No sign there was a door with a hidden library from here. No windows on the top floor or any indication there was a second floor with anything in it from across the street. Once they sat down and ordered, Judy and her parents immediately began talking to each other as if Vaughn wasn't even there. At first, just after they gave their food orders, he tried to follow along with the conversation, but his eyes kept glancing sideways to the library across the street. Abe did not come running out, but he couldn't shake the feeling he was being watched. There was a constant itch at the base of his skull, which made him twitch and rub at the back of his neck. He was soon staring at his hands, then the table, then at his food. "Hey, where are you?" Vaughn looked up and smiled at Judy. "Sorry, distracted, I guess. Tired." "Well, can you try entertaining my folks for a bit? I have to go make a phone call." "Who do you have to call?" "It's a business thing. Work." She replied, a mild look of irritation crossing her face. Her phone was already in her hand. "I'll be right back." For some reason, this snapped Vaughn back into reality. It was a Saturday. They both took vacation time from their respective jobs on Friday and through the following week. This made no sense. "What work thing?" he asked, aware his in-laws were staring at them. "It's Saturday. Why would work be calling you?" Now Judy looked really annoyed. She cast a side eye towards her parents. "What's your problem?" she asked through clenched teeth. "You know I have work on the weekends sometimes. It's just part of the job. I'm the only one who can do what I do." Vaughn wanted to keep arguing, but he can already tell she dropped back into a defensive mode. If he kept pushing, this would blow up into a full-fledged argument. She's done it before, calling him out in front of waiters or cashiers at the grocery store. When the red haze falls over her eyes, all she sees is red and doesn't care about the collateral damage. "Fine," he said. "Don't take too long." Judy smiled and walked off then. He watched her go, out the door and into the parking lot, the phone already up to her ear. He watched her out of the corner of his eye as she paced back and forth the way she did when she called people. "So, how are things going at work with you, Vaughn?" his father-in-law asked. No response from Vaughn, not even an indication he had heard. "Vaughn?" he asked again. He snapped his head around and looked his father-in-law in the face. "Sorry, Ned, my brain is just elsewhere today. Things are fine. Busy, always too much to do." He was soon lost in a conversation about running the marketing department of a major travel company. He talked about the press relations, writing press releases, media relations. The entire time he talked, his eyes darted to the right. He saw Judy pace back and forth, still talking. It looked like an intense conversation by her expression. Several times, Vaughn had to ask his in-laws to repeat themselves, but not enough to seem totally lost. Still, his eyes darted to the right. Just as he was about to go out there and ask her what the fuck she was doing, he saw her shut off the call by pressing the disconnect spot on her touchscreen. Then, there was a moment when she pressed the edge of the phone to her lower lip and smiled. It was a warm smile. The kind of smile she had given him when they were first dating, and he imagined she gave when they finished their phone conversations in those years gone by. She paused for just a moment, as if not wanting the call and that moment to end. Then her face cleared, and Judy walked back into the restaurant. Vaughn felt his stomach twist, and his heart hammered like a fist in his chest. "Goddamn," he whispered. "What was that?" his mother-in-law asked. "Sorry, nothing," he said. "Sorry, what did you ask me?" His mother-in-law repeated herself, but Vaughn still didn't hear a word she said. He watched his wife enter the restaurant, stuffing her phone into her purse, and walk back to the table. Moments before she got to her chair, he saw her put on a fake smile. "Sorry," she said. "Took longer than I thought." "Everything okay at work?" her mother asked. "Fine," Judy replied. "Just a few papers got misfiled. They have to scan them in now, but they missed a few pages." Whatever question his mother-in-law had asked was now forgotten. The three of them were soon deep within a new conversation, and the steady drone of their voices washed over him again. Vaughn gritted his teeth, grabbed his napkin, and began twisting the ends around his fingers. He kept replaying the smile over and over again in his head. Call over, pause, edge of phone to lips, then the smile. He compared it to the fake smile he saw when she got to the table. God damn, he thought over and over again, the napkin twisting around and around his fingers. God damn. When lunch was over, Vaughn looked across the street and felt a strange pull to the building. He wanted to run over there, pound his way up the hidden stairs, and demand Abe to give him the book containing his wife's thoughts. It was nearly irresistible. Funny, he thought, how fast the mind could work. Had anyone told him this morning he'd end up in a bizarre hidden room talking to a mysterious old man who was likely not actually an old man, and discover there's a room containing books for every person who ever lived with their thoughts inside, he'd have said they were nuts. He would have been the first to call the police to come get the raving lunatic off his property. Now, his brain had not only already accepted the entire experience was true, but he was sure he needed it to find out what his wife was up to. He managed to keep the small talk going without being remotely engaged. Instead, his mind wandered back to things which had happened regarding his wife over the past few months. The dinners after work, which had never occurred before, or the lunches on the weekend happening at a very increased rate, the aloofness displayed. Had there been other strange, private phone calls of late? He wasn't sure, but thought there might have been. Vaughn didn't know about the people Judy worked with. He had never been to a team outing or even met them. She had mentioned some guys in conversation, but never so longingly or lovingly he felt he had to worry. Was her saying this call was work-related a sign she was sleeping with a guy from there? There were ex-boyfriends, of course. Vaughn knew about the guys she had dated before they met. One of them was a very serious relationship, too. Her folks thought she would marry that guy when things suddenly went south. It took her family a few months to figure out Vaughn was for real, and they were really a couple. Judy had a nasty habit, at least in his opinion, of maintaining a friendly relationship with guys she had dated. She was still social media friends with the prior serious guy. They messaged each other privately much more than Vaughn ever felt comfortable with. "You okay?" Vaughn snapped back to reality. He turned and saw Judy staring at him. He smiled and patted her hand. "Just tired," he said. "The drive yesterday really wore me out, I guess. I always have trouble sleeping in an unfamiliar bed, you know?" Judy nodded. "I do. You're not still upset with me about yesterday?" He was, but he didn't want her to know. "No, it was nothing. We were both just tired and the drive made us cranky. I'm fine." Judy reached out her hand and put it across his own. Her fingers entwined around his fingers. He squeezed back, but saw a quick look of pain and concern cross her face because he squeezed harder than intended. Vaughn released his grip a little, but felt a bit of satisfaction at the same time. They arrived at her parents' house, and Vaughn excused himself to head upstairs to their bedroom. When Judy gave him a strange look, he assured her he was just tired. He wanted to take a nap. He listened for a moment while on the stairs as his in-laws and his wife sat around the dining room table. Before long, he knew they would sit out on the back porch, watching the afternoon as it turned into dusk. The trees back there were huge, ancient, creating natural shade which made even hot summer days cooler. They abutted a forest, too, adding to the allure of the yard and home. He walked into the bedroom and kicked off his shoes. The hardwood floors creaked loudly when he wore his shoes. Once up there, he paced back and forth from the window along one wall to the small window in the wall opposite. He wrung his hands, twisting his fingers around and around each other. He had to be wrong, had to be crazy. These were the two thoughts which kept twisting around as much as his fingers. He had not seen the room. There was no hidden room at the library. None. It was impossible. The very idea was ludicrous. A hidden library manned by a demonic old man who provided books with people's thoughts in them? How crazy. He was losing it. Vaughn worked hard back in the real world. It was hard for them to find time off together to come visit her parents or do any traveling. He was always stressed, too, worrying about this and then the other thing. He had been this way most of his life. Vaughn got results from the work he did, but it took a toll on his mind from time to time. Twice in his adult life, he had had an official mental breakdown. Once, he had tried to kill himself. Was it happening again? He had just finished a major ad campaign, and it had required lots of extra work and weekends. He was tired, and part of why they had come here was so he could try and relax. Needless to say, the last thing he wanted to do was relax. So if you thought about everything he had been through this afternoon, nothing made any sense. Abe did not make sense. Even if Abe were real, his reasoning for revealing himself to Vaughn made no sense. Why show him these things? Why? The world worked in a certain way, and hidden libraries with books of people's thoughts was not how the world worked. Vaughn sat down on the edge of the bed and looked down at his stocking feet. The next thought was about Judy. Was Judy messing around behind his back? Was there something going on? The other question was, would proof of one be proof of the other? If he could find out Judy was having an affair, would it prove Abe was real and the hidden library was right? One thing was certain. He had to find out if Judy was having an affair. There were two ways he could do so. The first, he could come up with an excuse, head back to town, and see if Abe could get him his wife's book. Even then, he'd need additional confirmation. Second, he could wait until Judy fell asleep and take a look at her phone. He was pretty sure she had not password protected it yet. He lay down on the bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling. The afternoon sunlight played across it, the shadows of the trees waving at him. The window next to the bed was open, the air cool. Birds chirped outside playfully. Any other time, this would have been the perfect day. Today, it all felt fake. At some point, he dozed off. When he awoke suddenly from a dream where he was being chased by something he couldn't see, the light on the ceiling had changed. The breeze was cooler. He looked outside and saw clouds had rolled in. When he looked at his watch, he had only been asleep for 45 minutes. Not long. He could hear Judy talking downstairs and the sound of plates moving around. Vaughn put his feet on the floor. His head felt dizzy, fuzzy again. For a moment, he thought he saw a shadow move to the right. Something huge and with gnarled fingers tipped in claws. When he turned his head, the shadow vanished, and he realized it was the shadow of a tree with its branches forming fingers and talons. In his head, though, he was sure he heard Abe laughing. He stood up, headed downstairs after putting on his shoes. The tingling sensation in his head continued. As he walked down the steps, the sensation seemed more like something tugging at his brain. "Hey, sleepyhead," Judy said when he reached the bottom of the stairs. "Hi there," he said. "What's up in here?" "Just getting dinner ready," Judy said, coming over to him and touching his face. "You feeling okay? Did you get some rest?" He put his hand on her own and pulled it away from his cheek. "I still have a bit of a headache. Hey, I think I need to go into town and get some aspirin." Judy looked confused. "I'm pretty sure Mom has aspirin somewhere around here." "You know I can only take that one brand, with the caffeine in it," he replied. Judy's confusion just seemed to grow. "I bet she has some of that, too. What's wrong with you?" "Just my head," he replied. "I'm going to head into town. Where are the car keys?" "In my purse?" Judy said, but now she looked irritated. "We're going to eat soon. Don't be late." Vaughn smiled, hoping it looked better from Judy's side of things than it felt on his face. He leaned in and kissed her. "I'll be right back, promise." Judy's face said she wasn't buying anything he was saying, but he stopped in the living room, found her keys, and headed out the door. He was in the car a moment later with the engine running. Time had stopped. As Vaughn headed down the winding, twisting roads toward the library, he remembered how things seemed frozen. His wife and in-laws had been in the same place and position they had been in when he went into the hidden room. Time had seemed frozen when he came back out and then sped up to the present. What the fuck is going on? He asked the car. To drown out his own thoughts, he turned on the radio, found the rock station. It didn't quite drown out his thoughts, but it helped drown out the buzzing sensation. 10 minutes later, he pulled into a parking space across the street from the library. Overhead, the clouds had gotten darker, the wind stronger. There was the distinct smell of rain in the air. As he crossed the street, noticing the families up and down the street looking for cover, he heard the distant rumble of thunder. Vaughn trotted up the stairs and through the outer door. The light within the library beyond the foyer was dimmer than before, just a few lights on. He couldn't see anyone there, but didn't care. He turned left and tried the doorknob for the entrance on the left. It turned immediately, and he stepped inside. Just as before, there was the sensation of the world tipping wildly on its axis for a moment. The air got thick. He stood at the bottom of the stairs, holding on to the handrail. "I thought you'd be back," a voice echoed from atop the stairs. "Come on up, Vaughn." It was Abe's voice, but somehow different. Not quite so old, perhaps? Despite the difference in tone, Vaughn knew for certain it was him, waiting up there like a spider in the center of its web. Vaughn headed up the stairs, reaching the top and turning right. As he crossed into the room with the librarian counter, he noticed the murals had changed. These new images were more violent, also more vibrant and real. A painting of John the Baptist's head on a silver platter presented to a woman. Across the way, on the other side, a painting from the French Revolution perhaps, with a man holding up a bloody head on top of a scaffolding. He did not see Abe. "Abe?" he cried out. "Are you here? I heard your voice." There was a disorienting moment where the shadows around the room moved and undulated as if alive, like a dark ocean casting black beams of light across the walls. Then, from within the dark room behind the counter, Abe stepped out. Only this was a much younger man, perhaps a man in his late 30s or early 40s. He wore a dark pinstriped suit with a purple tie. His hair was mostly black, but dusted with gray, and he wore no glasses. "Good to see you again, Vaughn," he said. "How can I help you?" Vaughn stared at the man with wide eyes. "What happened to you?" Abe laughed and looked down at himself, his arms wide. "Don't like the suit? I can change it." No sooner had he said so than the suit shimmered and swam around his body. When it stopped, he was now in a blue suit with a black shirt and red tie. "Better?" Vaughn opened and closed his mouth like a fish. The words would not come out, but it felt as if his eyes might pop from within his skull, perhaps to roll around on the floor like forgotten marbles. "I bet you're wondering who or what I am, right?" Abe asked. "Well, it's hard to define and answer that particular question. This is usually where people wonder if I'm a demon or Satan himself. The answer is much more complicated. Things are never as black and white as everyone wants to pretend they are they? There's shades of gray. You can call me Mr. Gray if you want, but if the name makes you think of those sexy books too much, you could just keep calling me Abe. One of my favorite names, bestowed upon my kind centuries ago, one of the oldest, is Abaddon. Abe for short," Vaughn whispered. "So was everything you told me a lie? Looking for someone new to operate this place? Do I have to sign a contract in my blood and you take my soul or something?" Abe tilted his head back and roared with laughter. "Nothing so dramatic. Look, maybe I fibbed a little. I don't know if any human will have the wherewithal to actually take over this operation. So far, I've tried many, many times, and not a single one can handle it." "Then why do it?" Abe leaned forward, clapped his hands in delight. "Why not?" Vaughn shook his head as if to clear it, but there was no clearing away the image of the younger man standing in front of him. There was no changing or denying the fact the room kept changing around him as Abe talked and moved. Abe sighed. "When you've lived as long as I have, you have to find ways to pass the time, to abuse yourself. You humans are so much fun." Vaughn shook his head. "You keep changing the reason. One thing one minute, another the next." "And that's what will keep it interesting." Abe smiled. "Look, I just need to know the truth," Vaughn said. "I don't give a fuck about becoming the librarian or if you're Satan, whatever. At this point, you're probably just a figment of my imagination. I just need to see my wife's book. I need to know." Abe stopped laughing, but the smirk stayed on his face. "Ah, yes, the lovely Judy. Some suspicions, eh? There are always suspicions. You humans are so predictable with the love thing. Always a sore spot and an easy button to push." Abe extended his right hand and snapped his fingers. The area behind the counter suddenly lit up bright, and the shelves moved and swirled until one book floated off the end of a metal bookshelf. Slowly, it tumbled its way through the air to land on Abe's palm. Once there, the lights in the room with the bookshelves went dim, and Abe offered the book to Vaughn. "Here it is, Vaughn," Abe said, but as Vaughn reached for it, he pulled it back again. "You have to be sure now. You have to be sure you want to know what's in here. Remember, there's no turning back once you open the book. If you want, I can erase any memory of this place right now. Just walk out and you'll forget about it. But if you take the book, you're locked in. No turning back." "What kind of fucked up rules are these?" Vaughn asked, sweat beading on his forehead. My rules.
My place, my rules. What fun would this be without rules?
Vaughn stared at the book. In his head, the buzzing and fuzziness had turned into a pounding desire. There was a small voice in his head telling him he had to know. "Take the goddamn book, Vaughn," it said. "Take it, find out, then deal with it."
"Time is ticking, my friend,"
Abe said, the smile still on his face and no trace of annoyance in his voice. Infuriatingly, the creature, sounded amused by all of this.
"I'm gonna have to put this away soon and then erase your memory after all. There's no shame in it. Some people cannot handle the inner workings of another human's mind. The mind is a hole through which good and bad pour through. The thoughts of the universe traverse the brain. Evil and good mix and mingle like a date night. The end result can be as horrific, as gory as a traffic accident."
"Could you just give me a hint?" Vaughn asked desperately, wiping at the moisture on his forehead.
"Where would the fun be in such a thing?"
Abe said, as if admonishing a child.
"Besides, do you honestly think I know all of the thoughts in all of these books? There'd be no need for books if such were the case. Now, I have my own suspicions about the fair Judy. That's why I mentioned you should watch your wife in the first place, but I don't know for certain. Take it, or don't. Decide."
Before he even realized his hands had moved, Vaughn snatched the book out of Abe's hands. He didn't see the smile widen on Abe's face, well past where a normal smile would have ended. The creature's lips pulled back until the ends of its mouth nearly met the corners of its eyes. The eyes burned yellow, and the iris became a vertical slit like those of a cat.
"Good,"
Abe whispered. Vaughn took the book to the counter and laid it down flat. In an instant, he flipped rapidly through the pages. It seemed no matter what page he stopped on, there were graphic descriptions of sex. It was as if every page was filled with agonizing details of Judy's sex escapades and her every thought related to it. Vaughn wiped his eyes and felt tears against his eyelids. "Why is it like this?" he asked. Abe came around the edge of the room, almost blending into the shadows along the wall.
"The books contain every passing thought from every person. Imagine trying to look at computer programming and seeing just an endless, constant stream of ones and zeros. If you were to stare at raw, unorganized thoughts, you'd go insane. Remember the jumble you saw when you first looked at your mother's book? This is what raw thought looks like. Your brain and the book merge, and it organizes itself based on your needs. You came in here wanting to know if your wife was fucking another man. The book is showing you every man or woman she ever had a sexual moment with. The biggest, best porn you will ever read."
Vaughn bit his lower lip and flipped the pages to near the end. He could feel the book getting bigger as he did so. Judy was adding thoughts so fast, new pages were being created as he turned the pages. He slammed the book back down and stared. There it was. The day she met Ron was the day Vaughn had to work late. He was working an event at his place of business and had to stay there late into the night to help set up and then clean up. Judy had gone out to the grocery store, of all things, when Ron approached her. He was a maintenance man, still wearing a uniform with his name over his left breast. Younger, blonde, with piercing blue eyes. He smiled, she smiled, and then the flirting commenced. Because she had been home first, she wasn't wearing her wedding ring. While Vaughn was working away, schmoozing with clients and then stacking chairs, Judy was having a drink with Ron. All of this started a year ago. They didn't hook up that night, but they did the following weekend when Judy told Vaughn she was meeting a friend for lunch, right in Ron's car in a goddamn parking lot. From then on, it had been lunchtime visits and lots of phone or FaceTime stuff, with the two of them meeting up in hotel and motel rooms as frequently as they could. It seemed they were insatiable when together. Judy felt 20 years younger. She felt wanted. Vaughn felt both anger and sadness vying for supremacy within him for several moments. He slammed both fists down on the counter and tipped his head back to scream into the air. Then he picked up the book and threw it across the room, where it rebounded off the wall.
Hey, that's valuable merchandise, pal.
Abe said, but there was humor in his voice.
I'm guessing you know something for certain now. Something bad.
I can't believe she'd do that to me. Vaughn spat through clenched teeth. Hot tears ran down his face. How could she do that to me? Abe strolled over, the hint of a smile on his lips. He put a hand on Vaughn's shoulder.
Hey, sorry, buddy,
he said, but sounded anything but sorry. His tone was mocking.
Look, you wanted to know. See, this is why you'd be perfect for working here. No attachments now, right? You can just leave her.
Vaughn stared at the man beside him. Abe's eyes flashed red for a moment, then became green gold. I can't just leave her, he said. I can't let her do this. I have to talk to her. She means everything to me. Abe laughed loud and long.
I'm offering you the chance of a lifetime here, Vaughn. You can come work here. The rest of the world will go on, albeit much slower than you think. I can arrange it so the rest of the world thinks you died or just vanished. They'll move on. You can watch them deal with it right from their books. Your in-laws, your wife, friends. I'm telling you, the deal is on the table. Earlier you said the offer changes, but it's not true. I need you. I need humans. You can be part of this.
Vaughn clenched and unclenched his fists. He shook his head, then nodded, then muttered to himself. He walked back to the book, flipped to the end. Didn't take him long to find the thoughts from this afternoon. Oh my God, I have to call Ron. I need to hear his voice. Oh, I have to remember how he felt the last time. He felt so good inside me the last time. I have to get away from this. I have to get away from my parents before I start screaming, and I especially have to get away from Vaughn. Him and his fucking books, wandering around a goddamn library where he can't even check out any of the books. So disconnected. Ron's not disconnected. So into me, so ready for me, listens to me. I wonder if we can leave here early. I need to get back to him. I need to see him. I want to see him, standing there, naked, waiting for me. So eager. I need it. Vaughn stopped there. Sure enough, she had called Ron while standing in the parking lot, in full view of everyone in the restaurant and even himself. The way she smiled as she talked. The pause where she seemed lost in thought, touching the edge of the phone to her lips as if giving it a kiss. Vaughn screamed again, clutching both sides of his head, clumps of his own hair between his fingers.
I can see you have some unresolved issues here,
Abe said, still sounding so amused.
Look, I get it. Sometimes you just can't make a clean break. So what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do before you come back here? There's so much more to see, Vaughn. There are books there which will blow your mind. You're being too narrow, but I get it. It's hard to let it all go, no matter what the cartoon princess says in her song. If you can release this and get away from it, maybe you can still work here. You must shed the things holding you back to work here. This place is about knowledge.
That's bullshit, Vaughn said through his hands, still covering his face. You know it's bullshit. This is a game to you. None of this is real, and the offer will vanish once I do what you say. Abe looked wounded.
No, you misunderstand me. I need you, Vaughn. I need someone like you at the very least. The passion you show, the devotion you have toward her. Only someone truly in love would have such rage. I've been looking for a long time now. I need to know if you can handle managing this place.
Vaughn waved his hand at Abe. He didn't want to hear anything the man was saying at this point. Instead, he imagined wrapping his hands around Judy's neck. Even better, he imagined punching this Ron guy, then stomping on his head while wearing steel-toed boots. The satisfying crunch his skull would make when it caved in beneath his feet. Ron was back home, though. The book seemed to show it was Judy who first had the idea of flirting with a stranger. It was she who decided this was what she wanted to do. This was her infidelity. Ron was a kid making a stupid mistake and being seduced by an older woman.
Hey now, don't go off into misogyny land here,
Abe cooed as if reading his mind.
It takes two parties for this to happen. Look, I said it before and I'll say it again a few seconds later. Take care of things if you feel you must.
Abe reached into his pocket. There was an odd buzzing in the air, a slight crackling of energy. Then he removed his hand, and inside was a small pistol. It was just barely bigger than Vaughn's hand, an automatic of some kind. Abe held it out to him.
Take it if you must,
Abe said.
Take care of things, but be warned. I can't help you if you get caught. You can come back here when it's done and we can see about the job I offered you, but if you get caught, you have to deal with it yourself. Her parents are in the house. There's 7 bullets in this thing. Just 7. No more. Make them count.
Vaughn stared at the gun for a long moment. His mouth felt dry and his hands were conversely sweating profusely. Was he really going to take the gun? The sides were silver. The handle was white. The more he stared at it, the more beautiful the gun became. He could feel it in his hands. He could imagine what it would feel like going off. The surprised look Judy would give when she realized he had fired. She'd have the merest fraction of a second to realize he meant business and that it would be over for her. Vaughn grabbed the pistol and shoved it into his pocket. Abe stepped aside and let him pass. Before he even realized he was doing it, Vaughn ran down the stairs. Behind him, he heard Abe's laughter, deep, resonant, inhuman, echoing down the stairwell. It sent chills down his spine, but then he was through the door, and the sound stopped. Vaughn drove back with his fingers gripping the steering wheel tight. His knuckles turned white. His jaw moved behind his lips, grinding his teeth. Although normally the roads where they were, with their giant hills and twisting, blind curves, made him very nervous, he drove down them at the brink of driving right off the road. When Vaughn burst out of the front of the library, the world was on pause just like before. He barely noticed. His head felt light, but he kept running this time. He was halfway to his car before the world suddenly jumped back into life. People on the sidewalk near his car looked stunned when they saw him there, and he had a fraction of a thought maybe it looked like he had just appeared on the street out of nowhere. Time for worrying about those phenomena at another time. He had things to do. As he drove, Vaughn became acutely aware of the shape and weight of the gun in his pocket. He had never fired a gun before. When he was a kid, he had numerous air guns and was a pretty good shot, but never a real gun. Never at another person. His magnanimous feelings toward Ron had vanished now. Yeah, he was young and stupid, but he was an adult. More than ever before, Vaughn wanted to drive all the way back home, kill Ron, sever his head, then drive back here with his bloody, dripping trophy held in his hand. He imagined finding Judy asleep in the bed and tossing the head onto her in the middle of the night. When she opened her jaw to scream, he'd shoot her right through the mouth. Vaughn didn't trust Abe at all, of course. He had a sinking feeling once the deed was done, the hidden library would just vanish. He'd probably be standing there with a gun in his hand and blood on his clothes, shouting like a lunatic when the police came. This was fine. He wanted them to come. He would spend the rest of his life in prison. It was okay with him now. What mattered was ending this thing. Finishing this sham he and Judy had been living and wipe the fucking smile off her fucking face. The anger bubbled beneath him in a seemingly endless river of pure rage. He hadn't realized how much resentment was there beneath the surface. Yes, he knew he and Judy had been a bit distant as of late, but he hadn't thought she would do this. They had been through so much. A year after they got married, Judy had gotten pregnant. They were so happy and prepared their house for the baby's arrival. Then, at about 3 months, she had a miscarriage. This had hit them harder than either of them thought possible. At the time, Judy leaned into him while they sat in the driveway outside the house, having just come from another doctor's appointment, and she said she wasn't sure they would get through it this time. She felt this might be too high a wall to climb with him. The blows kept coming, too. Judy soon found out she would not be able to get pregnant again. They made half-hearted discussions about adopting, but by that point, they were exhausted. So tearfully, one weekend, they dismantled and sold off the things in the baby's room. Then they repainted and it became an office. They had never discussed it again. Then, 2 months after they removed the crib and sold it online, Vaughn lost his job. Judy was back at work and they had enough to survive, but it was 6 whole months of stress and worry as his severance ran out along with the unemployment. He finally found a newer and better job, but there had been a lot of lost sleep, tension, and frustration. Since then, though, they had clawed their way back. He and Judy had made love again a year later. They were suddenly like they were when they first met and couldn't keep their hands off of each other. Judy got promoted. Then Vaughn did, too. Things were going well, although they were each busier than they had been before. Now this ridiculous thing with a stupid man who didn't deserve to look at her, let alone touch her. God damn it! Vaughn slammed his hands against the steering wheel. The car swerved to the left, and he fought with the car to pull it back. The road became blurry, and when he wiped at his eyes, he realized he was crying. Was this how his father felt? The thought shot through his brain like a bullet. Had there been things between his parents he'd never noticed? Had his own mother betrayed the man Vaughn barely had the chance to know? Vaughn was suddenly flooded with memories. Was Abe doing this to him? Was this something to do with the library? Memories of his father looming over him, having come home from working another night shift, looking tired and worn out, kicking his shoes off near the door, and the horrendous stench of the foot odor combined with the cigarettes he smoked back then. This was the 70s when smoking was dangerous, but no one seemed to really care or believe. There were the early days, before his sister came into the world when Vaughn was 5. Vaughn would sit on the living room floor and play with his toys while his dad sat in the big chair against the wall, smoking and watching television. Sometimes Vaughn would sit in his dad's lap and his dad would make him laugh by rubbing his stubbled face against Vaughn's while shouting, "Whisker burns!" Vaughn had to pull over. There wasn't much along this stretch of road, but there was a farm up ahead which was large enough to host a farmer's market on the weekends. This was held in a large driveway area, now open and empty. There were no people there at the moment, which was perfect. Vaughn swung into the lot and sat there with the car's engine running. The dust from his spinning tires across the gravel swirled around him and put him in his own little temporary cloud. The tears were back, and Vaughn looked at his hands to see they were shaking. The memories were intense and unrelenting. Why was this happening? His father worked hard. Mostly he worked nights. When Vaughn's sister was born, they would play together, but it was a rule they had to be quiet during the day so they didn't wake Dad up. He would appear in the morning to watch TV, but he never wanted to play or do much of anything with either of them. He was tired, so he wanted to eat something, drink coffee, smoke, and then go to bed. Somehow, he still managed to sleep. During the day, Vaughn, his sister, and friends would play around the house, but always out front. The backyard was where Dad's bedroom was, and no one was to disturb him during the day. Then Mom would make dinner, wake Dad up, and he'd join them for a meal. After eating, Dad would watch a little more TV with the family before heading back to bed for a few more hours, being awakened just as the kids went to bed. This is just how things were. Vaughn didn't know anything else. He loved his father, but his dad was always an enigma. When his dad had a day off, they went out to breakfast as a family, and Vaughn remembered laughing a lot. Dad always ate his omelet and drank lots of coffee. If it wasn't an omelet, Dad was an Eggs Benedict kind of guy. There were times when Vaughn and his dad played with his toys on the floor. Christmas was a big day for such things. His father seemed to enjoy playing with the toys as much as Vaughn. But in retrospect, there was a sadness there too. Something behind his dad's eyes. Something lost and looking for a port in a mental storm. Vaughn was 10 years old when things went really bad. His mom got pregnant. She was in her early 40s and they seemed happy about it, but everyone, even Vaughn, understood there were health risks. Vaughn tried to be supportive, but the eventual did happen. His mother lost the baby, and his father fell into a funk. A real one. Nothing subtle about it. His dad slept all day and then was hard to wake up at night. They went to their usual breakfast on the weekend, but his father didn't seem quite as jovial as he had been. The jokes were less frequent. They didn't go to the movies so much. More often, his father snapped at his mother or he and his sister. Nothing seemed good enough, and he would fly off the handle on the least little thing. One night, his father and mother got into a spectacular fight. The shouting had been intense, elevated to screaming. Vaughn and his sister cowered in their room. Vaughn read books to his sister, trying to keep her calm, but it was hard. They were terrified. When they heard their father's footsteps coming down the hall, they quickly hid under their blankets in their respective beds. Sure enough, he opened their door and his heavy breathing filled the room. "Go to sleep," he barked, then slammed the door. The next day, their dad's car was still in the driveway. His mom fed them breakfast and saw them off to school, saying little. Vaughn's sister asked about their father, but Mom just shut her up. His mother gripped the steering wheel tight as she drove, seemed distracted and uncertain for the entire trip. Kids have an amazing way of jumping from one thing to another. Vaughn went off to school and got caught up in daily school things. Never once did he think about his father or his mother. Not until the end of the school day came, and he saw his mother behind the wheel of the car, her face pale, her eyes wide and staring, with red around them as if she had been crying, did the dread start to sink its claws into his stomach. His sister seemed oblivious, but there was something about his mother which sent up red flags left and right. While his sister did all she could to get Vaughn riled up, he ignored her and stared out the window. When they reached home, it was Vaughn out of the car first. He had no idea what he intended to do, but some part of him thought he could head off the resumption of the battle from the night before by getting into the house first. Maybe if he ran to his father and told him how much he loved him, or at least warned him Mom was in a mood, then things would be okay. His father was not in the living room, nor was he in his favorite chair in the rear family room. The chair looked as if it had been moved, the footrest extended. Vaughn ran through the house, calling out to his father. Vaughn was puzzled. His father was always in his chair at this time. He'd lay back, smoking cigarette after cigarette, and watch TV. Thinking maybe his dad had gone to bed, Vaughn ran to his bedroom next. If his father was asleep and he woke him up, he'd get yelled at, but he was still determined to find a way to step in between his parents. The words would come to him, he thought. He'd find a way to negotiate some sort of peace. The bedroom door was open. The bed was made. His father's work clothes lay on the floor, but his father was not there. Vaughn's smile froze on his face, and his brow creased. He heard his mother yelling at his sister in the background, but this only served to stoke the desire within him to move faster. Vaughn called out to his father one more time, and this time ran back to the family room. Something told him there was a clue there, something his eyes had seen but his brain had yet to acknowledge. As soon as he walked through the kitchen, he realized what it was. The basement door was open. Strange. This door was never left open. The stairs were steep, and the chance of either Vaughn or his sister tumbling down them was great. At the bottom of the rickety wooden steps was hard concrete. The basement was unfinished, but there was a pool table and toys and boxes along the wall. Why was this open? As Vaughn moved slowly toward the door, he heard his mother let out a noise he had never heard before. A yell. Distantly, he realized he heard her shout his name, but instead of stopping, this caused Vaughn to run down the stairs. He reached the bottom and spun in a circle. When he turned to his left, a scream started deep within his body, but froze somewhere in his chest. He couldn't believe what he was looking at because believing it was real was to acknowledge what it was. This was his imagination, like when he was certain there were monsters beneath his bed or hiding in the closet. At first, Vaughn wasn't even sure what his eyes were showing him. How could the brain of a child his age process what he was looking at? He saw shoes with the toes pointed down. barely touching the cement floor of the basement. It was his father's shoes he recognized first. Beneath the shoes was a puddle of foul-smelling liquid. His dad had put his weekend jeans on for some reason, which were stained now. His hands hung limply at his sides, the skin pale. It was the face which made Vaughn finally release the scream in his throat, the face which would haunt him for the rest of his life and make him wake up screaming time and again well into adulthood. His father's face bulged around the cord he had tied around his neck. His tongue protruded from his lips, turned black now. The face was also black and blue, as if he had been beaten and bruised before hung. His dad's eyes were open, the lids not quite closed, and he stared at Vaughn. The eyes were not accusatory or angry. They were sad, as if telling Vaughn life was not worth it. If you worked and worked, got married, had a family, none of it mattered. In the end, you ended up dead in a basement having pissed yourself. Vaughn had no idea how long he stood there screaming. The next thing he remembered, his mother was there behind him, covering his face, too late, with her hands, and pulling him away. However, her own screams served to scare him even more than his own as she looked at what was displayed before them. For years, Vaughn wondered, what had his father been thinking? What had the final fight been about? His mother would never tell him. Perhaps if he went back to the hidden library, he could look it up and see. Maybe he could find his father's book and see what was on his mind as he made the noose and stood on the box. What were the thoughts in his head when he kicked the box away, then hung there, barely touching the floor with his toes, strangling to death? Had his father felt as alone as Vaughn felt now? Had he felt betrayed? Perhaps he wondered what he had done to deserve the verbal assaults his mother threw at him, just like Vaughn wondered what he had done to drive his wife into the arms of another man. As he sat on the side of the road, he could picture his father's face so clearly. It was still a memory he could conjure with total accuracy and vividness. The sadness, the purple hue to the skin. Would Judy have a different look once he shot her? Vaughn pulled the pistol out and stared at it. Was he really going to do this? He had never killed anyone or anything. At the same time, he had to confront his wife about what she was doing. He had to stop it. The anger was still there, but now there was sadness. As Vaughn weighed his options, a thought occurred to him. Maybe there was something else. Maybe if he could just show Judy the truth of the world, she'd wake up the way he had. Vaughn put the gun away and shifted the car into drive. A moment later, he was speeding down the road. The anger still burned, but now a bright ember of hope merged with a dim ember of possibility to create something else inside his chest. Vaughn arrived back at the house 15 minutes later. When he walked in the door, he expected everyone to be out on the back porch or watching television. Instead, his wife and her folks were still sitting around the dinner table. It looked as if they had just served the meal, the food still steaming hot. The three of them looked up at him with mild surprise and concern. "I didn't think you'd make it back," Judy said. Vaughn smiled weakly. "Sorry, took longer than planned." "We just served up the food," his mother-in-law replied. Vaughn was once again struck by how differently time moved in the hidden library. Did the world freeze, or did it just slow to a crawl so glacial it appeared nothing moved? These were questions to ask Abe later, but they nagged and itched at Vaughn's brain. The meal was delicious. Steak, vegetables, potatoes. The conversation was light, and Vaughn managed to stay engaged throughout. At the same time, he kept his eyes on Judy. Did she seem distracted? Agitated? The rule of the house was no phones at the table. Did the bumping up and down of her leg under the table mean she was thinking about Ron? Did her eyes dart left and right a little too often? Perhaps like a trapped animal looking for a way out? Dinner finished, and somehow Vaughn did not start screaming at his wife. He was particularly proud of this. Now was the tough part. Judy had plans to stay in tonight, but he needed her to come with him. He had to try to show her what he saw and what he knew. They stood up to clear off the table. While rinsing dishes in the sink, Vaughn watched his wife out of the corner of his eye. At one point, she grabbed her phone and headed out of the room. She said she had to use the restroom, but the minutes extended until she was gone for more than 5 minutes. Neither of his in-laws seemed to notice, so Vaughn did his best to keep his cool and finish the dishes. His mother-in-law said something about dessert, but Vaughn begged off and walked through the house. He found Judy sitting on the front porch, texting away. Vaughn opened the door as quietly as he could and stepped up behind her. He couldn't see what she was texting, but at the top of the screen, the name of who she was texting with was visible. Ron. "I think we need to talk," Vaughn said. Judy jumped and the phone fell from her hand. She stood up and whipped around, facing Vaughn with wide eyes. Her face immediately switched from startled to angry, then worried. "You scared me," she said, her chest heaving. "Why do you sneak up on me like that?" "You said you were going to the bathroom," Vaughn said, his voice sad and quiet. "Judy, don't even try to pretend here. I know what's going on. You want to tell me about Ron?" Judy flustered and couldn't spit out a word. "Vaughn, look, Vaughn didn't even realize he had pulled the pistol out of his pocket at first, until he saw the look in Judy's eyes. He held it in his right hand. It felt almost natural there now, as if he had been preparing himself in some part of his own mind for this very moment. "Where did you get that?" Judy asked. "Vaughn, what are you doing? You hate guns." "We're going for a drive," Vaughn said evenly. "I need to show you something." Judy shook her head. "You're out of your mind if you think I'm going anywhere with you while you're holding a gun." "Then I'll shoot you here in front of the house," Vaughn said. "Then I'll have to shoot your parents and myself. If you scream, I'll have to shoot you, then any nosy neighbor who comes over to see what's up. What if it's one of the kids on this block?" Judy looked stunned. She blinked several times, as if doing so might clear the vision in front of her. Vaughn did not understand where the words came from. He couldn't even believe he was saying them and couldn't imagine ever being able to shoot a kid or anyone else, for that matter. What he said didn't even make much sense in the long run. If his plan ended with him shooting himself, why not just start there and avoid killing anyone else? Despite the roiling confusion inside his mind, Vaughn kept his face even and emotionless. But he heard Abe's voice in the back of his head, telling him he needed to assert himself, do this thing, find out what she knew, find out to his satisfaction and take whatever steps were necessary. Then come to the library. Come find out what the rest of the universe had to offer. All the secrets of every person were there. Imagine what he could find out. "Vaughn, put the gun away," Judy said, her voice trembling but overall calm. "I can explain. We can talk about this. It's not what you think." "Oh, it is what I think. It's exactly what I think. You've been fucking some young guy named Ron. I know. I know a lot of things. Things I need to show you. Yeah, we need to talk, but we're not doing it here. Now get in the fucking car." To add emphasis to the threat, he cocked the hammer back. How much of a hair trigger was there? He had no idea. Carefully, he put his finger outside the trigger guard, hoping she didn't notice. "Where do you want to go?" she asked. Now, her voice showed the first signs of panic. She cast a quick glance back at the car, as if doing so would provide some kind of answer. "Where do you want to take me?" "I'm not gonna shoot you or anyone if you get in the fucking car, Judy. I need to show you something. I need you to see what I've seen." "You're talking crazy, Vaughn. What have you seen? Did you look at my phone?" Vaughn smiled and shook his head. "I've seen your thoughts. Now get in the goddamn car and let's go. I'm not asking again. Come with me and let me show you something. Then we can talk." "Where?" "A library," Vaughn said. Then he pointed at the car with the barrel of the gun. "Now go. In the car. Now." The drive was tense and seemed to take forever. Judy kept trying to talk to Vaughn, but he grit his teeth and ground his jaw, stopping himself from replying. He held the gun in his left hand, pointed at her across his lap. "Look, Vaughn, we can work this out," she said, her voice somehow calm now. "We can go to couples therapy or something. I met Ron one night while I was out and it just sort of happened. You know, things with us haven't been great for a while." "That's a reason to fall into the arms of a younger man," Vaughn said through clenched teeth. "I didn't run off and bang an intern at work. I just stayed with you." "And you think doing something like this is healthy?" Judy asked. "Where did you even get a fucking gun? You hate guns. This is insane." Vaughn nodded. "This we can agree on. I think this is insane." He laughed a weird, desperate laugh. "I mean, this is utterly crazy, but I need you to see. I need you to see what I saw today. I need you to understand." "You're not making any sense," Judy said. She put a hand on his shoulder as if to comfort him. "Just pull over. We can go back to my parents' house. I'll let this go, and when we get back home, we can find help for you and for both of us. We need therapy for us as a couple and each individually." "Stop it," Vaughn said. "Stop trying to talk me out of this. It's not happening. You have to come with me. I have to show you something." "Where are we going?" "You'll see." They drove in near silence the rest of the way. Vaughn kept his eyes on the road, but thought he heard Judy crying beside him at one point. He wondered if she was weeping for herself, for them as a couple, or for losing her boy toy. He didn't care. Let her weep. Let her weep for whatever she wanted, but she would see. She would see the library. She would see Abe. Then she could finally understand the universe, and they would be back on an even footing once again. He hooked a left in front of a passing truck into the parking area across from the library. The lights were on, but it had to be close to closing time. He shifted into park and pointed the gun in Judy's face. "We're going into the library," he said. "Don't scream. Don't cause a scene. Just get out and walk with me across the street. I have the gun, regardless, and before anyone can help you, I'll shoot you, then myself. Don't test me." "Vaughn," Judy said as tears streamed down her cheeks. "There's nothing in the library. Just books. Just that old woman and her dog. I don't know what's caused you to break from reality like this, but we have to stop. We have to get you help. Right now, you're not thinking rationally." "Stop talking," Vaughn said. "Stop fucking talking. You will not rationalize your way out of this. Get out of the car and head toward the library. Don't run. Don't scream." Judy reached for the door handle, tears dripping into her lap. She muttered something under her breath, but Vaughn couldn't hear what it was. When her door opened, Vaughn opened his own and got out of the car as quickly as he could. He was around to her side of the vehicle a few seconds later, grabbing her left arm in his hand. He stowed the gun in his left front pocket, keeping one hand on it as they moved. He could feel its hardness, somehow reassuring, but also terrifying. The area was not too busy at this hour, at least on the street. The sun had just started to head down below the tree line, and the sky was turning all shades of orange, pink, and blue. When Vaughn cast a glance behind, he saw there were plenty of diners in the windows of the restaurant where they had consumed lunch earlier. Did any of them see what was happening? It felt as if they were broadcasting what was going on in bright neon letters. They were across the street in seconds, and then up the stairs a moment later. Vaughn's hands were sweating, and his heart pounded. He realized he was whispering under his breath, begging the universe for the hidden library to be there, to not be crazy. Vaughn opened the door. Judy walked just in front of him. He saw her glance through the interior doors, perhaps hoping to see Dolores. She started to head toward the entrance to the interior of the library. He thought she was getting ready to run, bolt through the entry and run screaming through the shelves, looking for a rear entrance or the librarian. Vaughn shook his head, heading for the side door to his left. "Not that way, this way." "You said we were going to the library," Judy whispered. Not the library through there. The hidden library. Vaughn, what are you talking about? Don't you see how crazy this sounds? Vaughn pulled the gun out of his pocket and snapped at her. Of course I do. God damn it, can't you see how fucked up I am? I need to prove I'm not crazy. Before you or I do anything about you and Ron, I need you to see this. Vaughn reached out a hand and placed it on the door handle. He heaved, hoping for the door to swing open dramatically. He wanted to see her face when time stopped. Just to see her face when she felt the air change around her would confirm everything. The door didn't budge. Wait, he whispered. Just wait. He pulled again. The door made a soft grunt noise, but didn't open. No, Vaughn whispered. No, it has to be there. It can't have moved. With mounting frustration, Vaughn pounded at the door. He kicked it. He was about to fire a few rounds into the goddamn thing when the inner door to the library opened.
Hey, what's going on out here?
Dolores stood in the doorway. At her side was the dog. Dolores, hey, it's Vaughn. Remember me? I was here earlier.
Of course I remember you,
she said.
I don't forget a face. You were wandering around looking at the books. My remembering you doesn't, however, explain why you're kicking my door.
Vaughn held out his hands and then realized he had the gun still in his hand. Look, I need to get into the store. Please. Do you have a key? Dolores nodded slowly.
I do, but why are you holding a gun? What's happening? Why do you want to go upstairs? There's nothing up there.
Yes, there is. Please. I need to get up there. I need to take Judy up there to see it. Dolores seemed to notice Judy for the first time. She cast a glance at her, eyebrow raised. Vaughn followed her gaze, waiting with bated breath to see if she'd do anything. Vaughn waited for Judy to scream for help or some form of hysteria. Would he start shooting? Did he have the ability and capacity to do so?
Okay, I can open the door for you,
Dolores said, fishing into her pocket and removing a large keyring.
Just put the gun away, okay? We don't have to take this any further than this, right? When you were here earlier, you seemed like a nice guy. I'd hate to have to call the cops or an ambulance here.
The older woman waddled her way over to the door. She fished around her keyring until she found a gold-colored key, which fit into the lock without protest. The lock turned with a loud click, and she pulled on the door. With a grunt and the sound of metal on metal, the door opened. Beyond was a darkened stairway leading up, and not much else. Even at the distance Vaughn stood away from the door, he could smell dust and mustiness from the open door.
There you go,
Dolores said, stepping aside.
There's an area up there we used to use for events, a stage and tables, even a music system like they used to have in old-time days, with a player piano and drums on the wall which bang out a set rhythm as it plays songs. Used to be dances there, too.
Vaughn turned to Judy, just barely hearing what Dolores was saying. Okay, upstairs. Let me show you. Judy nodded and walked past him into the doorway. When she passed Dolores, Vaughn saw her raise her eyebrows and give a shrug. Dolores acknowledged nothing. If a message had been conveyed, no one ran for a phone or screamed for help. We won't be long, Vaughn said. Thank you.
Okay, let me know when you're done,
she replied, and then put a hand on his shoulder as he walked past.
Son, I don't know what you're doing. I don't know what happened after you left here, but I could tell even then something was going on between you two. Don't act rashly, please. Not in my library.
I need to see Abe, Vaughn said, his voice quivering. I need to show him to Judy. Dolores looked confused, but her hand fell away from his shoulder. Vaughn entered the dark doorway. Judy was halfway up the stairs, looking back and down. Vaughn waved his hand, and she turned, heading up the rest of the way up the steps. He held the gun loosely in his right hand as he walked up the steps. There was no feeling of the world shifting beneath his feet. The buzzing in his head did not appear. When he breathed, it was not the weird, hot air which had been there when he talked to Abe. Instead, he just breathed in dust and old, stale air. He felt a fist clench his heart. They reached the top of the stairs, and Judy stood in the room which greeted them. She looked around with bewilderment, but not awe. Vaughn at first could not see what was there. For an instant, he still saw the hidden library, but then it all resolved into stark relief. There were dozens of round tables, covered in white cloths. Chairs perched on top of the tables, their legs pointed at the ceiling like dead insects on a windowsill. The room was large and mostly empty. Most of the chairs and furniture were pushed up against one wall, leaving the large open area in the distance for dancing. At the end of the dance floor was a stage with an old blue curtain where entertainers would come out to perform. Above them were gears and tubes. Vaughn followed their trail until he saw a set of drums nailed into the wall. There were woodwind instruments in other parts of the wall, and in the corner was the piano. Vaughn bet there was a host of old-time songs which could be played, and the instruments on the walls and ceiling would play. A band without players. No, Vaughn said, stepping into the room and spinning around. No, this isn't right. This isn't what was here. What was here, Vaughn? Judy asked. What did you see here? There was a room here, Vaughn said. A big room and a counter. Then over here there was another doorway and a line of shelves which went on at a goddamn eternity. There was an old man here, Abe, except when I came back later he wasn't old, he was young. He showed me the books, billions of books, books which had people's thoughts in them. Every thought they ever had, and you could turn to the last page and see their thoughts as they had them. I saw my mom's. I saw the fucking president's thoughts. Then I saw your thoughts. I saw how you wanted Ron. I saw it. Tears sprang out from his eyes and coursed down his cheeks. The frustration inside of him burned like a furnace, and he felt it turning into anger. Vaughn, you need to calm down, Judy said, walking slowly towards him as if he were a wild dog growling and snarling at her. Think about what you're saying. Think about how crazy it sounds. Look around you. This is what's up here and what's been up here for decades. You can smell it. This room is old, musty, and dirty. It's been here a long time, unused. Vaughn spun in a tight circle. This had to be a trick. Abe was here. He could feel his presence, eyes watching him. I'm here, Abe, he called out. I brought Judy. I need you to show her. Show her the books. You have to help me. There was no reply other than a soft echo of his own words a fraction of a second after he said them. Vaughn put his hands to his head. His brain felt as if it were on fire, but not in the way it usually felt when he had visited this room before. This was like the buzzing of bees inside his skull. This is what it feels like to go insane, he thought. Vaughn, sweetie, please, Judy said. She had taken several more steps towards him as he spun around and called out to seemingly no one. Put the gun down. I don't know what's happened, but you need help. You're sick. I can help you get help, please. Vaughn whirled around and faced her, his expression a mask of anger. Get away from me. You want to help me? Why would you want to help me? You hate me. Don't know why. I know you do because I saw it in the book. I saw your thoughts, Judy. You blame me for every failure you've had since we've been married. You and your fucking asshole boyfriend, Ron. You never wanted to help me before. You never cared when I was in pain, did you? Judy backed away, but Vaughn saw her jaw moving, grinding her teeth. The anger within her was building too. Did you? She snapped back. Did you ever notice how lonely I was? Did you ever care? Did you see how miserable I was at the first job I had when we got married? The long hours and lack of respect? No, you just skated along, happy to live off the salary I brought in. Don't you play the fucking victim with me, Vaughn. I always appreciated you, Vaughn cried. His head buzzed louder. It was like a nest of angry bees had been placed inside his skull. Couldn't she see the pain he was in? His skull would soon split open. The pain grew each second. I always told you how much I appreciated you. I did the best I could, but we got past all of that. We're in a good place now. We're both finally happy and doing well in our careers. Why would you pick now to find another guy? I don't know, Vaughn, Judy said, her voice filled with exhaustion. Maybe I got tired of the fights. I got tired of the battle, and when the battle seemed over, there was nothing left. Stop it, Vaughn said, shaking his head. Stop talking to me. Stop trying to talk your way out of this. He looked around once more. Abe! God damn it, Abe, where are you? There's no one here, Vaughn, Judy said. The anger inside of her pushed way down, and the sympathetic voice returned. We can figure a way out of this. We can get you help, and then we can try to work on us. Vaughn felt the tears streaming down his face. They burned tracks across his cheeks and dripped to the floor where, for all he knew, they burned their way right through the wood. He felt as if his blood had been turned into acid. His heart hammered in the bony confines of his ribcage. Vaughn turned back to Judy, her form blurry as a new wave of tears flowed out of his eyes and down his face. I love you, he said. I always have. I never strayed. I never got close. I'd show you my own books so you can see, but I don't know where Abe is. There's no Abe, honey, Judy said, once again stepping towards him carefully. No books up here and no hidden library. It was all in your head. Then how did I know about Ron? You probably saw something on my phone, Judy said, her eyes now also filled with tears. I'm sorry about all of this. I love you too, Vaughn. I did from the moment I saw you. I don't know how we got so far apart, but there's nothing between us we can't tear down. No gap we can't try to fill in. Put the gun down. Let's get out of here, please. Vaughn almost did it. He stared down at the gun and felt sick as his guts twisted. He hated guns. He always had. They were nothing but engines of destruction. People tried to tell him all the time when he argued for increased control they were just tools. Great, he would say. Build me a house with a gun and then I will agree with you. How had he ended up with a gun? Was Judy right? All of this was in his mind? Then, clearly, in the back of his head, he heard Abe's voice, telling him he needed to tie up the loose ends in his life. He needed to take care of things around him so he could come back. Maybe this was why Abe wasn't here. Judy was a loose end. Without her, he could see those books again, read more of the books again, know more secrets. Despite the sound of Abe's voice in his head, Vaughn turned around to see his wife nearly on top of him. She froze for a moment, studying his face. Then she put a hand against his left cheek. Vaughn, whatever's gone wrong with us and with you can be fixed, she said in a voice which sounded so reasonable. It was hard to argue against it, but Vaughn could hear Abe's voice telling him she was wrong. Come on, put the gun down and come with me. We'll just head back and pack up, then head home. It was here, Vaughn pleaded. It's real. There's Abe and the books. They record our thoughts, all of them. Who does? She countered. I don't know. I just know it's here. I saw it. I held the books. I held your book. I'm sorry for whatever you saw or think you saw. I'm sorry for a lot of things, but you're not thinking clearly. She came in closer and wrapped her arms around him. He felt her body against his, and his brain was immediately flooded with images from when they were first together. The first time he held her naked in bed. The first time they moved in together and had to share a bathroom. The times they sat side by side on the couch talking or watching TV, his hands entwined with her own, kissing her when he went out the door in the morning. Then the name Ron flashed across his mind. The words on the page of the elusive book, so many words about how much she wanted him, needed him, how she loved his cock and wanted to feel it inside of her. The anger flashed hot and bright white. Vaughn made a loud moaning sound of pure agony. He didn't even realize the gun had gone off at first. There was no dramatic sound. A soft pop muffled between their bodies. He barely felt the pistol move in his hand. Judy didn't seem to realize what had happened at first either. She just stepped back, her eyes wide, staring at him. Those eyes, which he had stared into so many times, looked so confused and scared. She pressed both hands to a spot on her side, below her ribcage, and when her hands came away, they were covered in blood. "Vaughn?" she asked, as if confused. Then she collapsed. How broken she looked when she started to fall. Vaughn instinctively reached for her and caught her as she fell. The pistol dropped from his hand and clattered to the floor as they slowly sank to the dusty wood. Judy's eyes never left his own, and the surprise and confusion just seemed to grow as they settled to the floor. "Vaughn?" she asked again. "I'm here," he said. I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to." Her body twitched and her chest heaved, and then her stare fixed on his own. The pupils became fixed and dilated. He felt her shudder all over, and then she was gone.
"Brilliant,"
a voice said from the doorway. Vaughn looked up and was surprised to see Dolores standing in the doorway. She had a too-wide smile on her face. He audibly gasped when she began to change, her features running across her skull like water. Then her skull also changed. It only took a moment, but Vaughn felt as if the moment ran on forever. Eventually, Abe stood there in his dark suit with the red tie. This time, he wore a pencil-thin mustache like some old Hollywood movie star. Abe waved his hand, and the room began to waver like his face had a moment ago. The hardwood floor vanished and was replaced with marble. Then the tables faded to gray, became transparent, and soon the room was empty. Murals appeared on the walls, and the openings into the dance floor disappeared to be replaced with paintings. The counter grew out of nothingness behind Vaughn, and just past this was the doorway into the vast area of bookshelves. The murals were of murder. Men stabbing women or each other. Men in brutal fights covered in blood. The image of a man in Vietnam shooting another man point blank in the head. The other pictures were probably famous too, but Vaughn didn't recognize them.
"You passed the test, Vaughn,"
Abe said. There was a noise from within the hallway, and then Dolores's dog appeared in the doorway. A moment later, it changed too. Its bones cracked and snapped as it grew, the face lengthened, the eyes got larger, and the teeth much longer. Eventually, it was nearly as tall as Abe. This hellhound creature panted, and Abe patted it on the head.
"Good boy,"
Abe said.
"Go lay down now. Daddy has some work to do."
The creature licked Abe's hand, let out a hideous yelp, and walked past Abe into the dark area of the hidden library. Vaughn could hear the claws tapping on the marble floor for an exceedingly long time. "Why?" Vaughn asked. "Why weren't you here so I could show her? I wanted her to see. If she saw, maybe things would have worked out." Abe sighed and shook his head in mock sadness.
"This is not a job for couples. Trust me, we've tried in the past. It always ends up bad, never works out. It takes guts and real balls to do this job, Vaughn. The kind of balls necessary to commit murder, for example. I needed to test you. I needed to know."
"Was it real?" Vaughn asked. "Was what I saw in her book real?" Abe seemed shocked he would even ask.
"Oh, I lie a lot, V, but I do not lie about the books. The books are not lies. No, sorry, old man, but the words you saw in the book were 100% real. Legit. She really was fucking a young dude named Ron. This was another reason she had to go, V. You had to take care of it because this job comes with a very long life expectancy. If you and her were here with the infidelity festering between you two, you'd end up fighting with each other for 1,000 years. We can't have that kind of distraction."
Vaughn wiped his eyes. The tears burned their way down his face and gnawed at the corners of his eyes. When he pulled his hands away from his face, He saw his palms were slick with blood. "What are you? God damn it, what are you?" Abe walked around the room, his hands in his pockets and a bemused smile on his face.
So many names. You humans have given us so many names. Devils, goblins, demons, lower gods, tricksters, sprites, fairies, elves, shapeshifters, skinwalkers. We're the things which hide in the shadows. Most of us, anyway. We whisper the naughty things into your ears. We put the shadows on your souls and the darkness into your hearts. When we tell someone to kill, he takes out a school. We whisper into another and they kill themselves, strap on a bomb vest, or crucify a man of peace on a cross. Sometimes we work on large numbers, convincing people one group is responsible for all the evil and must be destroyed. We keep humans in check, all the while permitting them to think they have control. We play with you because we were here first and we got passed over. You humans with your thin skins, small minds, and easy-to-confuse hearts somehow got the drop on us. So we wage a guerrilla war. Strike and hide.
Abe waved his arms around at the hidden library. The air shimmered and blurred as he did.
We reach through the spots in the walls, separating realities which are thin to touch you, corrupt you, warp you. To make you give in to your darkest desires, to show you the fear lurking inside of you, and then tell you the monsters under the bed were real all along.
Vaughn shook his head as if to clear it. He felt dizzy, lightheaded. Something wet ran over his upper lip and he wiped it with his sleeve, not noticing the red smear he left afterward. "I don't understand," he said. "What's the point? What do you get out of this? There's no job, right? No place for me with you? Is the library all lies?" Abe tilted his head back and laughed.
"Oh, the books and what's in them is reality. Something of my own invention. As to why, well, you see, we're predators. You humans are the prey. We feed off your emotions. Fear is the sweetest and most satisfying. Confusion is savory and filling. Find a way to combine them, and you have a meal to keep you full for centuries."
He licked his lips and smacked them as if satisfied. Abe extended his hands, and the room behind them responded with the soft whirring noise of the books spinning around and around on their shelves. 3 books floated out of the darkness and landed softly in his palms. Abe laughed and turned to look once again at Vaughn.
"We seek out the people who we feel will respond the way we want, the way we need." He shrugged. "We're wrong sometimes, but more often than not, we aren't. I knew you'd give good fear and confusion, but to properly answer your question, I didn't lie. You see, we can't be everywhere at once. Not only do our kind require humans for food purposes, we can extend lives and use you for assistance in other ways. You've probably already noticed how time moves more slowly here. Sometimes I think it even stops. You stop aging here. It means you'll live a long time here. I'll feed, and you can help lure prey. It takes so much energy to cross over. Having someone on this side helps. Economics, you see."
Abe walked slowly, the 3 books, 2 in his right hand, 1 in the other, balanced in front of him.
"But there's one final test you need to pass. One more thing you need to know. If you pass this, you're the person I think I can recruit for the gig. I need you to manage this library. I will visit from time to time, but I have to travel. The last manager passed away after nearly 2 centuries of manning the desk."
Abe stopped in front of Vaughn, staring down at him with red eyes which somehow conveyed sadness and sympathy, mixed with such hostility as Vaughn had never experienced before. He extended both hands toward Vaughn, handing him the books. Vaughn gently set his wife's head down on the floor, then closed her eyes. He stayed on the ground, but grabbed the 3 books, placing those on the marble in front of him. He crossed his legs like a kid on Christmas beneath the tree. He picked up the top book and stared at it with a confused look on his face. He passed his fingertips over the embossed lettering of the name on the cover. "I don't understand," he said. "This is my father's. He's been dead for years now."
Just open the book," Abe said. "Take a look."
Vaughn opened the book. At first, there were just the jumbled thoughts of a baby, then a toddler. He flipped forward, finding his father's preteen and teen years. He decided the last thing he wanted to do was read about his dad's sex life, so he flipped ahead. Now there were the thoughts about work, how he hated his job, how miserable he was working in this place with little sunlight and the endless noise. His dad thought about breathing in the dust from the candy conveyor belts or the vats of liquid chocolate. On and on it went. At first, the thoughts were excited, joyful. He was going to be making candy, and at the same time, he would be earning enough money to support his family. Vaughn's eyes blurred yet again with more tears when he read his father's thoughts about him. His dad had been so excited to meet him, to have a son. There were so many of Vaughn's accomplishments as he grew up, but seen from his father's eyes. First step, first word, butt kiss. First time taking him to the movies. First time he rode a bike without training wheels. But a sadness began to creep into those thoughts from time to time. Going back much farther than Vaughn ever realized, his father showed signs of depression, losing interest in the world and feeling lost in a fog with no way out. Thoughts of suicide. The joy became less and less as Vaughn and his sister grew. Frustration led to anger. The feeling of love and pride was replaced by jealousy and sadness. A sense of loss over what might have been, had decisions just been made differently, grew from a small spark to an ember, to flames within his father's imagination. Near the back, Vaughn realized he had come to the night his father finally committed the act. The slow planning over days, testing places around the house to find something which could hold his weight, drafting and redrafting the suicide note, the endless darkness and profound sense of drowning while on dry land, just wishing someone would see the pain he was in and maybe reach out a hand, the immense loneliness. His father wanted the pain to end. There was doubt mixed in with the planning and the need to end it. What came after? Having been raised Catholic, he worried about hell. He worried about his soul, but there comes a point when even fire and brimstone can be overcome by pain and a desire to end it. Vaughn read his father's thoughts as he got his family out of the house, as he placed his note where his wife would find it. The steps read like a simple checklist. Head downstairs, find the box he had stowed down there days before to step on, tie the cord around the beam, tighten the noose. Then, the final step. Pain. Like a sharp slap of cold water in the face, all that had been before vanished. The fall jolted him but did not snap his neck. His feet kicked, trying to find the box, but succeeding only in kicking it further away. The immense pain of the cord compressing his windpipe, trying to breathe but unable to. The world going gray around the edges, black dots dancing in front of his eyes, his lungs screaming for breath and his body already shutting down. On and on it went, until the darkness covered him completely, swallowed him whole. His sight went first, but he heard the urine hit the ground as his bladder let go. The pain stopped. There was darkness. Vaughn leaned his head back and moaned loudly. The pain in his chest was like a blow from a fist. He couldn't remember a time when he had cried as much as he had today, but more tears flowed. "Oh, Dad," he whispered. Abe cleared his throat. "I know the suicide part was tough to deal with, but that wasn't the lesson. Yes, your dad was fucked up in ways you probably never realized, but look at the book. Look at it, Vaughn." Vaughn wiped his eyes, feeling blood smear across his face but not caring. He looked back down at the book. At first, he was unsure what Abe was trying to tell him. Then something leaped out at him. There were more pages. Lots of pages. What? He flipped to the next one and gasped. His father's thoughts continued after the darkness. His dad awoke in the black. Then there was light. Then he moved from one place to another, floating, moving, confused and terrified. This was not the heaven his Catholic upbringing had promised him, nor the purgatory which had been threatened. There was darkness and things moving in the dark. The confusion became terror. The terror went on and on for page after page, his father pleading for light, calling out to a God who did not seem interested in responding, desperately trying to find a way out of the shadows, back into the light, back to his home, sad, keening pleas to the universe to let him do all of this over again. Then there was light, a new world. His father was able to move from one place to another by mere thought. He passed from one dimension to the next. Confusion gave way to wonder, then fear. Yes, there were amazing things out in these alternate worlds, but also things which hunted and bit. At one point, his father was being chased by beings who appeared to be little more than smoke. Then his dad became aware of voices in his head. With concentration, his father figured out he could check in on his family. He could observe his wife, Vaughn, and his daughter. He was frustrated he was not able to interact. He sent a bird instead, influencing a cardinal to tap at his wife's window, sending a monarch butterfly to land on his daughter's hand, whispering his son's name while also sending a flock of white butterflies to surround him one morning as he went to his car. "I'm here," he thought. "Can't you feel me? I'm here and everywhere. There's so much more to the universe, so much more to life than the shell you wear. It's glorious and terrifying. Please hear me. Feel me." On and on it went, page after page of terror and amazement, joy and sheer horror, unlike anything his corporeal body had experienced. Time and again being near and next to his family, the ability to be everywhere and nowhere, eventually moving past thinking in English or any language. The words became jumbled and then written in some primitive scrawl apparently even the book could not translate. "No," Vaughn whispered. "This is impossible. This is a trick. This is some kind of fucking trick." No, my boy," Abe said. "It's not. You see, thoughts continue. What is your mind, Vaughn? What is most of your body? It's energy, and it cannot be created nor destroyed, just changed from one to another. You move from physical energy contained within a bag of skin to this. But it's different for everyone. Look at the other books." His heart hammering, his mind buzzing with the angry sound of bees, Vaughn looked at the next book. This was his grandfather's. The man had been dead for more than 30 years. Vaughn barely remembered him at all. Vague memories of the way he smelled like cigars and always wanted to hand out candy. This book was much thicker, and he flipped through it faster, skipping to the end. Except there was no end. No end at all. His grandfather had a long, slow death from cancer, and the pain at the end was immense. Then relief. A desire for the last few months of his life for all of it to end. Vaughn watched on the last page as more words appeared, once again in symbols and thoughts he could not process. His brain was unable to decipher, but he saw his name appear. Vaughn. "He's thinking about me," Vaughn whispered. "The dead think about the living quite a bit," Abe said. "But they eventually move past thinking like we do in the physical world. Well, most do. Some do not. Some, depending on how they died, refuse to let go. They continue to exist in the first stage of pure agony, terror, and confusion. They find ways to lash out at us, angry at the living for just living." "What's this last book?" Vaughn asked with trepidation. Some part of him already knew. "I think you know." Vaughn's hand shook as he moved aside his grandfather's book to stare at the last one. He had to only see the first name to know what Abe had done. Judy. He had already seen the first parts and the part involving Ron. He flipped to the last pages. Vaughn read the sheer terror and panic in his wife's mind when he pulled the gun. The certainty he was going to shoot her down there in the driveway. The anger she felt when she realized he knew what she was up to. The desperate thoughts of how she could get out of this situation and maybe save things with Ron. Maybe she could have both worlds. Maybe she could have Vaughn committed and run to Ron. Judy wondered if she might be able to overpower Vaughn. Get the gun. Would she be able to shoot him? She had to protect her parents. She couldn't let him start shooting in the house. The fear of just how far Vaughn had gone over the edge. What did he think was in the library? How could he scare the poor old woman librarian? What was this room? My God, what was going on in her husband's mind? Vaughn felt a shock when he saw how much she still cared. When she said she would get him help and then they would get help together, she meant it. "Oh, no, 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 no," he moaned. "Oh, baby, I'm sorry, oh no." "Don't do it," Abe said. "Push it aside. Yes, she thought about it, but do you think she meant it, even there? Don't make the mistake that just because she thought it, it wasn't a lie. Humans lie to themselves all the time. Lie constantly, in their thoughts most of all." Vaughn turned the page, and there it was. The terror, the pain, the feeling of a bullet entering her body and tearing up her insides, the overpowering sense of betrayal, then sadness as she realized she had lost it all. The darkness. Then the thoughts continued, screaming into the darkness, confusion, screaming Vaughn's name. Anger leaped off the page, each word a dagger in his heart. She was out there, flailing, trying to get back. She was in the darkness now, right here, just a breath away, unable to reach him. "Oh, Judy," Vaughn whispered. He looked up at Abe. "You son of a bitch. You made me do this. Now she's gone and I sent her there. She's lost in the darkness. She can't find her way out." Abe did not appear bothered by this. He shrugged. "When the death is sudden or violent, it happens. Look at your father. Look at any of these." He waved his hands and more books flew to him. Their pages opened and they floated past Vaughn's eyes, each one of someone deceased. A girl who had died in a car accident, a middle-aged man who dropped dead of a heart attack, a woman whose brain flooded with blood as a vessel she didn't know had a weakness finally broke. All of them suddenly in darkness, lost, scared. "The human mind holds on for a time," Abe continued. "The difference usually comes from those who plan their deaths or die of a long illness. Some people are ready to go and adjust to their new situation quickly. All those bumps in the night, the ghostly visions, whispers in the dark. They're people who refuse to let go, so they stay around until they can affect the world they refuse to abandon. Some can never let go." Abe waved his hands and all the books flew away like frightened birds. They thunked on the shelves. "What about Judy? What will happen to her?" Abe held out both hands, palms up, a gesture of I don't know. "She's angry, Vaughn. Betrayed. Now she's scared. It's delicious. But how long she'll hold on to this world, to you, to her family, is unknown to me." Abe came closer to Vaughn, hiked up his trouser legs, and squatted down to look Vaughn in his eyes. Vaughn studied the creature's face. It was all false. The features were younger than ever, but unsteady. All of this was a mask. "I need you, Vaughn. With me, your lifespan will be centuries. Help me manage the library. When death finally does come, you'll be ready." Vaughn felt lost in his eyes, unable to think. He thought of Judy, lost in the darkness, filled with fear, and it was like a splash of cold water on his face. He shook his head. In a flash, he reached down and grabbed the gun, pointed it at Abe. Abe looked sad for a moment. He sighed and stood up straight. "You disappoint me, Vaughn," he sighed. "You just lie and lie. Everything around here is fake. This is all masks. You were just a mask. You wanted me to kill her. You knew I'd come here. What are you, the devil?" Abe laughed. "We've had this conversation before. I didn't do anything but show you the world, the universe. I showed you inside of the human mind.
I've done it many times to many others. It brings the most powerful knowledge to your hands. It can be yours, always, but you have to cut ties. You have to be strong to realize what happens when humans die. Countless others have stood where you are. They have guns or knives. I give them out. They try to kill me. They talk about how evil I am. All I do is dispense knowledge. The greatest knowledge you can find. I can't help it if it cracks their mind.
Vaughn fired the pistol. The gun seemed louder now, somehow bigger. Abe waved his hands and the bullets just vaporized midair. Vaughn fired again and again. This time, Abe let the bullets hit him, his jacket moving with the impact. However, when he looked down at the holes, they sealed themselves, and he looked back at Vaughn, shaking his head.
You can keep shooting, or you can make your decision,
Abe said.
You can join me. Eventually, as the centuries pass, you might gain powers like mine. You can evolve, become something else. Vaughn, you need to listen to me. This petty drama you have here is nothing. Imagine reading the thoughts of genocides, massacres, shootings on a massive scale. Imagine reading the thoughts of assassins and witnessing history from within the minds of the people creating it. Think.
Vaughn let out a cry of despair and looked down at the useless gun in his hand. Then he looked down at Judy's body. Her eyes were closed now, but he could feel her nearby. He could hear her. She was still in this room, but in darkness, lost. Vaughn looked up at Abe again. The creature, this thing, this living nightmare who had watched him and decided to fuck with his life, smiled at him. Vaughn wanted to die. More than anything, he wanted to die. "Fuck off," he said. Abe barely had time to react before Vaughn put the pistol into his mouth and fired upward. The gun made a muffled snapping sound, and his body jerked as the bullet passed through his brainstem. Darkness fell like a curtain.
God damn it!
Abe screamed. Vaughn's body fell to the floor. Abe roared. Outside the library, several people reported they heard thunder and felt a rumbling in the ground. A child holding her mother's hand looked at the library and saw flashes of light coming from an upstairs window. Abe transformed for a moment into the giant, scaly, red-eyed creature he really was and roared again. He threw himself against the walls and paid no heed to the fact powder from the bricks fell to the sidewalk outside. This went on for 5 more minutes before he transformed again. He stood facing the wall, straightened his tie, and looked down at his suit.
Every time,
he said. He turned and looked at the bodies on the floor of his library. He'd have to move them. It would be a murder-suicide once the news got a hold of it. The local press would have a field day. Mourning and sadness. Abe would read it as they thought about it and drink in the fear. He was almost full now. He hadn't gotten the assistant he needed, but he had absorbed so much energy, so much pain.
Humans,
he sighed.
So sad, so predictable, so pathetic.
Abe straightened his tie once more and walked back into his library. Vaughn felt the darkness and then saw the light. Brilliant light all around him. There were voices all over. Most of them were gibbering in fear and anger around him. They sounded insane. "Judy?" he cried out. "Vaughn? Where are you? It's dark here." He was thought now. He had no body. He felt no pain. He forced the energy he was to meet with Judy's energy, and he felt her presence next to him. A moment later, he reached into darkness and felt a hand clutch around his own, even though neither he nor Judy possessed hands any longer. "Pull me out!" I will. I always will. Where are we? We're starting the rest of our life. You shot me. Did you shoot me? It doesn't matter now,
Vaughn said.
Hold on to me. Listen to me. We'll get out of this darkness together.
I'm scared.
I know, me too, but there's so much more to see. Just trust me.
He felt her energy cling harder to his. They merged together like beings made of light, like gods. Then they pushed through the darkness together. Knowledge can be a very dangerous thing. Some secrets are best kept secret. This is especially true when the sun goes down, the darkness creeps in, and imagination takes over. The time when the night comes out.
You've been listening to When the Night Comes Out, a weekly horror anthology podcast with stories by Bryan W. Alaspa and narrated by Allie James. For Bryan's work, visit his website at www.bryanwalaspa.com or visit amazon.com for his books of fiction and nonfiction. Be sure to listen to Allie's work on Facebook at Allie James Projects.